They're like bullies in school, only they'll kill him and put him in a hole somewhere. I know. I've seen it. I know what happens. And no one talks about it. And you don't know what's real. And the people who are crying the most are the ones who done it.
So, Irish hour-long dramas are kind of a thing now. So much so that there's a bunch of them that I actually haven't seen. And that is a decent barometer of how far we've come, because there was a point in time where there was so little content that if something was Irish, I would watch it. I watched every episode of Afric, and I didn't even know if I liked it. There was just nothing else though, was there? Now, there's plenty to go around. Whether they're good or bad, you have options. And this slew of classy telly that's been going on in the past decade all owes a debt to one show. I still think this is the best one. While there were TV dramas in this country before Love Hate, there might as well not have been, because you can't get your hands on any of them, except maybe Strumpet City. So if you're only getting into it now, this is where it all starts. At the time, so starved were we of shows that Love Hate could have been a bog standard middle of the road crime drama, and a lot of us still would have watched it because it was Irish. For anybody who watched Kin when that was on, you might remember that little short advertisement that played before it about great local drama. And I remember it because I enjoyed it more than Kin itself, because what's stated in that ad is true. There is something about seeing places and people and culture that you recognise that just does it for you in a way that content from other countries can't. So considering the makers of this show probably didn't have to try too hard, Love Hate wound up being so much better than it needed to be. It was grim, gritty, and sometimes downright depressing.
It was disgusting.
It had complex characters and compelling storylines. It had really good actors who'd done big things beforehand and bigger things since. It's quoted a lot.
I don't give a shit about anyone, man.
Cool it, build it.
What do I look like? A bleeding knacker?
Know what a tax is?
Yeah.
Good. 'Cause you're getting taxed.
Can you get me a fizzy orange?
It's always popping up on TikToks, it's referenced by judges, and you still see DVDs of it lying around people's houses. Which is interesting because looking at its first season, I do think it's kind of lacking. I don't think it represents the show at its best, and I would not have been surprised at all if it never made it past the first series. It's a very simple revenge story which is wrapped up a little too conveniently. It's quite soap opera-y, and there are clearly marked goodies and baddies in a genre where part of what makes these stories so compelling is how there isn't heroes and villains. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of money thrown at it either. Depending on where in the world or which version you're watching, whether on DVD or on a different streaming service, the soundtrack is different.
See you later, yeah? See you later, yeah?
Aidan Gillen, who was the largest actor in it at the time, was reportedly paid €15,000 for 3 months' work for the second season. There's a laughable punch sound in the next up section.
Yeah, I heard.
The intro sound is just taken from some sound library, which I learned when it turned up at the end of Snoop Dogg's talk show.
Tune in next week, same dog channel, same dog time. You funky bitch, you. Church. Preach. Tabernacle.
And the whole thing feels like it was made in such a fashion that if it didn't continue, it could have been repackaged as a miniseries. The central conflicts that take up the main story arcs aren't set up till the second and third series, but there's a lot to like here and a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. It does introduce the characters pretty well, there's some good moments that the show would later do better, and when you take it as a whole with the other seasons, you do watch it differently when you know how it ends for these characters. I went looking for information about how this show came to be, the behind the scenes, and for this season at least, there isn't a lot there. I don't know where my DVD for the first season is, but I know there was no bonus features or commentaries on it. The show's creator, Stuart Carolan, is kind of an elusive figure who doesn't do a huge amount of press, and before Love Hate he had done some TV and theatre writing and had worked with broadcaster Raymond Dunphy on his radio and TV projects, but this was Carolan's first big project. In an unusual move for television, almost every episode from the first to the last has the same director, David Caffrey, who's worked on most of the things Carolan has done since. Love Hate was never an ugly show, but it gets a lot better looking the longer it goes on. As for the genre itself, Irish crime content before this seems to have been limited to movies based on real life events like The General, Veronica Guerin, and Ordinary Decent Criminal. As far as any real life inspiration on Love Hate, I could not tell you. Is John Boy supposed to be John Gilligan? Well, they both largely keep themselves far removed from the actual nuts and bolts of the crimes committed. They are both prone to ostentatious displays of wealth. They get drugs from Amsterdam, and they're both named John. I can't think of anything else, and look, I'm not the true crime guy. If that's what you're interested in, fill your boots. There's plenty to go around. But as for me, I really couldn't say what real-life criminals inspired this show, if any. And the real-life comparisons are something that was much heavier in the conversation around the gangster show that came after Love Hate. What is known is that Stuart Carolan drew on stories he was told by a family member who worked in accident and emergency in the hospital who saw young men rushed into the hospital with savage wounds. And that is something this Clar has in spades. The cast only had two big names. In the case of Brian Gleeson, he was, and arguably still is, most famous for being part of an acting family rather than anything he'd done before. And something which has been parodied since, a lot of the cast were not from the parts of Dublin their character were from and could be considered posh.
It's been talking about a 6th series.
You say another word about it to anyone, you fat bitch. I'll personally spray paint your fat fucking face with acid, do you hear me?
So with no big names, no big budget, and seemingly no particular influence, Love Hate out of nowhere came onto our screens in October 2010, and it sure does feel like it. This show has a lot of scenes of people talking on phones, and the phones look so tiny. The show even begins with Nidge telling his girlfriend Trish that he's updating his Bebo page, a website that was in its death throes at this stage, and this is one of several scenes that really date this series.
What are you doing there?
Bluetooth? You on Facebook?
I'm getting fucking updates that I can get myself off of Airtel.
Have you been wanking to Jersey Shore or something?
Come here. Little 2-pack.
I'm not calling him 2-pack.
It was a joke. I'll call him P. Diddy.
Like many shows, Love Hate kicks off with a death, with the funeral being a reason to bring all the characters together. But credit to the show, the first time I watched it, I was genuinely surprised when Robbie was killed. He doesn't immediately give off the stench of someone who's being set up just to be killed off. Also, to give credit to the first episode, it dwells on the death and the grief for a really long time, and it does all of that before getting to the flashier elements of the criminal underworld. And this is something that Love Hate later on perfects. While there's displays of big parties, lots of money, nice clothes, the show is really good at making the world and life unappealing, and it has to be commended that the pilot spends as much time on the least fun aspect of the show as it does. This episode also introduces us to the Darren and Rosie subplot, which takes up a huge chunk of this season and the next, and if you're in the camp that finds this story compelling, I cannot count myself among you. For one, in this season at least, it's a love story that could really happen in any show, crime drama or otherwise. It's a love triangle where the other guy has almost no redeemable features. As the title would suggest, there is a lot of these relationship stories throughout this show, and I actually like almost all of them, but this one never did it for me. The distinction I'd make is the other relationships that come up later use this world and these people to show how it affects relationships, but that doesn't really happen with Darren and Rosie, at least not until the second series. It also has to be said that Darren and Rosie is brought down by every scene they share together being scored with this swooning music. The main story for this season, where Darren wants revenge for the death of his brother, isn't particularly well done, I don't think. He's given a tip that it's someone, it isn't them, and then it turns out to be the most unlikable, irredeemable character in the show. And while Robbie didn't immediately scream like he was there to be killed off, Huey absolutely does. He dominates every scene he's in, he's volatile, stupid, and nobody likes him. The only interesting thing about him is that he's the boss's brother, and people have to put up with and tiptoe around him. Like in the first episode, Huey and Stumpy exchange blows. They still go on holiday together, and Huey still wants him to hang out with him when they get back. That is kind of interesting, because as opposed to other lines of work where you put up with somebody while you're clocked in and then you can be done with it, in this world, you just have to endure it. A big problem with this season is points in the story have to be reached, and the means of getting there is either clumsily or conveniently written. The program needs to show that Darren is smart and why John Boy likes him working for him. So while waiting for drugs to arrive at a garage, Darren notices that the police are waiting, but he does this by noticing somebody's been power washing their car for half an hour. Seems a bit too obvious, but then again, the Gardaí are alleged to have called their surveillance van Wi-Fi Garda Surveillance, so maybe it's not that implausible. Darren wants to get back with Rosie, but Rosie is with Stumpy and is pregnant with his baby. So Stumpy, after going through her things and suspecting she's cheating, beats Rosie up, killing the baby in the process, which leaves the door open for Darren and Rosie to get together in the second season. That's a very coarse way of writing that situation away, and I think it would have been more interesting if Rosie left Stumpy and had the baby, and then the three of them had to contend with that situation. But I will say that the story involving these three gets better in the second season. And then, perhaps the most egregious example example of plot convenience. Darren finds out Huey is the one who shot Robbie. The clean-cut bad guy did the bad thing. Darren can't make a hit against Huey because of who his brother is. Huey is out to get Darren, and while out and about is playing with a gun. He forgets the one in the chamber and shoots himself in the head, concluding that story. Now, this character is written to be that dumb. That is true. But this is also the sort of character who's so violent and crazed that any number of people would be out to get him. In fact, there's one good scene where Huey is paranoid Darren wants to get him and a car speeds up beside him. He panics and runs away only for it to be kids messing, which would be all the more compelling if he had more than just Darren to be worried about. He could easily get caught by the police. This is the kind of storytelling Love Hate did really well later on. There's also a number of ways this story could wrap up as opposed to the way it was done. But also, Huey killing Robbie really isn't that interesting because there's nothing to like about them. What this show later on does well is it takes the characters you follow, the characters you like watching, and then shows them doing reprehensible things and really puts your fondness for them to the test. The writing does get better in later seasons, but this is the first example of a random act of violence being used to write somebody out of the show or wrapping up a story, and it comes up again. And then the season ends with Darren being shot by Stumpy. If the show ended here, it's a decent note of ambiguity to end on. Did John Boy hire Stumpy to shoot Darren? Did Stumpy do it of his own accord? Is Darren dead? These are all possible in this world. I think given how much better the later seasons are, I think the weaker elements of the writing in this season are perhaps attributable to there only being 4 episodes where each subsequent season has 6. This season has little moments that are interesting, but aren't expanded as much as they could be. At the time this show was made and broadcast, Ireland, like many other countries, was deep in recession. People were losing their jobs, shutters were going up on shops, there was ghost estates everywhere. It was an awful time, and there's stories to be told about how that affects people and pushes them into crime. But this show hardly elaborates on it, and everybody in this gang would seemingly be here regardless of the economic situation. John Boy talks about how
Ireland is fucked for the next 10 years, you know that, don't you? This is the only game where you make any money. Make your money and get out. I'm telling you, people are going to be selling up all kinds of stuff. Houses, land. All you need is the money. The banks won't give it to you. Here, I was thinking, I could set up my own bank. What do you think? Yeah. Couldn't be much worse than the bastards who are there now.
He meets with his legal guy about investing his money in distressed or liquidated assets. And at the wedding, Nidge notices the police and says,
Lazy bastards. Should be out arresting those wankers in the bank instead of harassing ordinary people.
But aside from that, it's hardly mentioned. And it's a pity because so much of this first season is just stories that just so happen to take place in Ireland rather than being stories about Dublin itself. Later seasons use Irish life, history and culture to much greater effect. But there's a lot to like about this season and how this world affects people on the outside of it. In the second episode, the gang needs a garage to sort their drugs and send them off to their distributors. When the garage they're set to use is compromised, they use the garage of a friend of Tommy's. This friend is not affiliated with this world, but gets in over his head trying to be friends with these men and gets beaten up and has a gun put to his head. He's a bit annoying.
For a lion.
But he hasn't done anything wrong. If the show serves as a whole as a cautionary tale about getting involved in drugs, this little story is a warning about trying to be friends with the people that bring them in. Darren's sister has been talking to some form of a psychic who tells her Robbie isn't at peace, so Darren pulls a gun on him to get him to stop upsetting her. And Mary has somebody leaving their rubbish in her wheelie bin, and Darren just so happens to spot them the moment after a phone call which has him heated, and he beats them up. One of the only parts of the story with Darren and Rosie I like is despite working a normal job, she's not clueless to what Darren and Stumpy do for a living, and she does ask for Darren to beat Stumpy up, but not to kill him. As for the female characters, unless I'm missing something, there's only one scene where it's just 2 women talking to each other, and they're trying on dresses and talking about the guys, but to be fair, it's a fairly lighthearted scene in the midst of some heavy stuff, and then basically the same thing happens again in season 2. But the story of the show isn't really about them, and they are given better material in the later seasons, and from the minuscule amount I know about the real life Irish gangsters, it is a very male dominated space. And the prominence the female characters have in the big Irish crime drama that came after Love Hate is a criticism that could be levelled at it, even if some of the people making that criticism don't always do it in the most eloquent of fashions. But unquestionably the strongest aspect of this show is the introduction of these characters, because while you do end up liking them, these are not good people. Tommy acts sheepish and innocent, but his only real motivation seems to be to go to bed. He's late to meet Robbie because he's in bed with Mary. He sleeps with Siobhan while seeing Mary. His response to Mary being concerned about an escalation at Nidge's wedding is to try and sleep with her. And while off getting cigarettes for Mary, he runs off to sleep with Siobhan. The Tommy-Mary storyline is wrapped up by Huey loudly announcing that Tommy and Siobhan got together, and Tommy and Siobhan become a couple between seasons, and it's for the best because there's really good stuff with these two as the show progresses. Darren is someone with the capacity for compassion and violence. It said the show's title might even come from him, with him thinking he's a good person and him having his own sense of right and wrong, even though in the law's eyes, all of this is wrong. And this is demonstrated in the scene where Huey, with Elmo, tries to take Darren out. After Darren shoots back and Huey runs away, Darren goes over only to see that the driver is Elmo and takes his shirt off to put pressure on the wound and calls an ambulance for it. That compassion doesn't compute with this life, and that ultimately leads to Darren's undoing, and the signs are there from day one. John Boy is an interesting character. He dresses and holds himself differently from the rest. He does want to talk and hang out with everyone, but he will hold over them the fact that he pays all of them to maintain the upper hand, and he will abuse that when he needs to.
You still owe me. I pay you to do Nixers, do I? Must be paying you too much. And when I ask you to do shit, you do it. You don't talk back.
He has these morbid interests.
Do you know that there's this disease? You can only get it from fucking dead bodies.
Then they cut the face off the head. Then they sewed the face. All of it, the skin, everything. They sewed it onto a football and they left it out in the front garden for his kids to play with.
Do you know there's this place over in India? In the mountains where they leave the bodies out to be picked apart by vultures.
He's very wise to his brother's violent tendencies, but he loves him regardless and protects him at all costs. He's paranoid, he takes a lot of cocaine, and this only gets worse in the second season. But the real one to look out for on the rewatch is Nidge, because while Nidge does go from being a funny supporting character to a vicious monster, the signs are there from the get-go. Early on we can see Nidge clearly enjoying intimidating a frail woman with debts. He's rude to Trish, he cheats on her, he can't remember their son's birthday, and he proposes to her anyway. He will use her. He'll fumble awkwardly in front of John Boy over Darren also being invited at the wedding, and insists John Boy can come.
But I want you to come.
But I'm not coming, am I?
And when John Boy tells him he won't be, he'll tell Trish he told John Boy where to get off in a bid to get some intimacy.
What did you say?
I said, you know.
Oh, baby.
All the seeds are planted to show who this guy is, and he becomes so fascinating to watch. So while this first season is at times uneven and has stories that aren't the most well written and wrap up in ways that are a little too convenient, and while a lot of the show could really take place anywhere and isn't necessarily a story that could only be told in Ireland, there's some really good moments and great characters. In any event, the show was a ratings hit and was reviewed mostly pretty well, so a green light was given to continue, and thank goodness it did, because the full potential clearly hadn't been met, which becomes apparent when you get to the later seasons. This season walks so the other seasons could run, and the running starts with season 2.
But I need to start watching me back. Look up in the John Boy. You go around thinking you're bleeding Superman and what happens? Boom, you're gone. That's not gonna happen to me.
The first season of Love Hate was very uneven, but it had good characters and a solid basis to build a good show on, and that starts with the second season. Everything the first season did well is done better with this season. The show has more room to breathe with the 6 episodes compared to the first season's 4, and I think this confirms that the weaker elements of the first season were due to these constraints. Things have more consequence in this season. For example, in the first season a shipment of drugs is brought in. The only strife is sorting a different garage. After that it's distributed, and then everyone has a party. There's 2 drug shipments in this season. One is busted while being mixed, which leads to court cases and a shooting, and the second one is partially impounded. There's still a party, but someone gets shot. Old characters are dumped and the new characters introduced are all mainstays, and the show is better for it. When I first watched the show, season 2 was my favourite, but I wouldn't say that now. In spite of all it has going for it, the show hasn't fully arrived yet. While everything new that's introduced is to the show's benefit, there's still a bit of dead weight that carries over from the first season. While there's 1 or 2 aspects of the writing that I'm not so keen on, almost everything about this season that I dislike is a carryover from the first season.
Where's Sexy Rosie gone to?
We'll get to you two. But what is the story of this season? Well, I find it amusing that the blurb of the DVD says that John Boy is endeavouring to pack up shop and retire in Spain, because John Boy doesn't actually mention moving to Spain till the 5th episode, the second last one, the one where he dies. But the story of this season is Darren gets into debt and has to go back to work for John Boy, only now John is spiralling out of control. And yes, in the first episode he does say that he wants to get out, but I think the DVD blurb is being charitable because he says a lot of things. He's all over the place. But that's what made this season my favourite when I I first saw it, it's still the thing I like most about it. It's the John Boy character, and this is his season, and he's just a much more interesting person to follow, especially in the context of a gangster show. As the boss, he cuts deals, he meets with legal people, meets with an informant, he has a daughter, and he has the most incredible apartment that even Ed Sheeran said he wanted. If there is any aspect of this show that glamorizes this life, it's this apartment. But as for the apartment's occupant, mid-season, the central conflicts affecting Darren, Nidge, and Tommy and their partners are all as a result of what John Boy tells them to do. We see Darren having to deal with taking somebody else's life, we see Nidge having to uproot his family just before Christmas when his wife is pregnant, and we see Tommy sending his girlfriend off to hide money and trying to get a hit done, and this is all so much more interesting to watch than somebody wanting revenge and wanting their ex back. We'll get to you too. In the first season, John Boy was really just there to fill the kingpin role. Almost every scene he's in somehow ties back to Darren's story. Now he's somebody we follow and learn so much more about, while also witnessing his descent into mania. What really sums it up for me is this shot in the second episode where he's sitting there in front of an ashtray, an energy drink, a beer, and a bag. Take the illegal drugs away and that's still a headache, and the diet of somebody who's bound to make the wrong decisions. But the powder is the main thing. In the first episode, John asks Darren what to do about nightmares, and Darren makes a throwaway comment.
Don't sleep.
But John has something to stop him from sleeping, alright. He's surrounded by the trappings of wealth, and none of it's enjoyable. I think what best encapsulates it is a man who has a pool table in his own living room, just dumps his computer onto it and sits there watching CCTV, looking for a ghost. Things get so bad that in the fourth episode, Nidge won't do lines with him, and you can see he thinks John is taking it too far. And this is Nidge, the man who 3 episodes earlier kneecaps somebody because he can't get intimacy from his wife. And John Boy's scenes are greatly bolstered by the absence of Huey, although Huey looms large over the proceedings because John Boy spends most of his time locked away in his apartment doing lines underneath this gigantic painting of a Last Supper of him, Huey, Michael Collins, JFK, Jimi Hendrix, Bruce Lee, Bob Marley, and Biggie and Tupac, and this is just perfect. This is exactly what a youngish man from Dublin with stupid amounts of money would get done. You see it all the time with those really crap posters of mashups of gangsters and surrogate father figures. They're awful, but people buy them. Huey, while being kinda tedious to watch, was a stabilizer for John because he held himself in contrast to him. John didn't go too mad because Huey was enough crazy for the both of them. With Huey out of the picture, John's either unhinged or frightfully lonely, or in the company of someone who makes him feel alone. Debbie, the first of many new characters introduced this season. Who would an unpleasant gangster who doesn't get out much date? A drug addict who looks good on his arm. With one exception, every scene John Boy and Debbie share, he shows his contempt for her, or even just his disinterest. He even gets annoyed at her crying over him being shot. But who else would date him? This season we see John Boy has a daughter, Kaylee, and while we never see a scene with her mother and him together, the way they both respond to one another over the phone just says it all. She knows exactly what he's like and she's sick of him before he even enters the room. As for Debbie, she will consistently toss away any form of dignity to get a fix. But if you look at the scene where Debbie asks John for money, or when she says she's too tired to meet Kaylee, he's happy she needs the money. He's happy she's letting him down. He's got something to hold over. His relationship with everyone, his lawyers, his informant, his gang members, everybody he interacts with is somebody who's beholden to him in some way. And that's how he wants it, or at least how he thinks he wants it. Because in the end, he reveals the only one he trusts is Darren. Because Darren is the only one who wants nothing from him, save to be free of him. Everyone else, his gang members, his lawyers, his girlfriend, his informant, they all act like they like him. They all depend on his good graces. Darren makes no effort to hide his distaste, and it's seemingly part of what endears him to him, which is also John's undoing. Darren co-conspiring with Nidge is the one to bring John Boy to an end. But this show has some neat little things that you don't notice until you rewatch it. Darren's central conflict at the start of this season is whether or not he's able to kill someone, and he robs ATMs, a very Darren way to do business, as in his mind this would be a victimless crime, to pay off his debt to John so that he doesn't have to be put in a situation where he has to kill someone under John Boy's orders. But he goes through with it, and John, by forcing Darren into killing someone, leaves Darren more than capable of killing him. I like Darren's story in this season a lot more than the last. At the end of the first season, he's told by John that they're all square, and he's shot by Stumpy and survives. But before this new season even begins, Darren is already working for another criminal. There are no scenes of Darren trying and failing to get a job. This was Dublin in recession, so jobs would have been hard to come by, but there's no evidence he even tried, and I kinda like the idea that Darren just isn't any good at anything else or can't try. But I would fall down more on the side of this being a result of the recurring trait throughout Darren's arc across all the seasons: this man has piss poor judgment. It was stupid to go back to work for a criminal. It was stupid to borrow €30,000 from him, and it was stupid to jeopardize it by killing his dog to protect someone, and it becomes worse in retrospect when you see who he was protecting. Luke is somebody who is difficult to watch. I have to look away every time he engages in self-harm and kills the swans. But I find him and his story so interesting, and it feels very Irish. Now, I've no doubt this happens all over the world, but so many of us have experienced meeting someone who has just been dealt so many bad cards in their life, and they may not present well socially, and sometimes they say the wrong things, and you might not have the greatest of chemistry with them, but their heart is seemingly in the right place and you feel for them, and this would perhaps be what makes Darren keep him around. But Darren doesn't know where to draw the line, and he brings this man into his sister's house, jeopardizing her and her kids. Darren means well, but this person is a danger to themselves and others and needs help. And while Darren showing someone like this kindness is one thing, a woman like Mary being even vaguely decent just goes to Luke's head, and he begins stalking her. I like that little moment where she gets him to help him with preparing the dinner. She might think she's making him feel at ease, giving him something to do so he's not feeling like an imposition, but she wouldn't even have this man in her kitchen if Darren hadn't brought him in. And Mary's judgment isn't that great either, mind. She dates a man she doesn't even like. Between seasons, she lets Darren pay for 30,000 euros worth of jobs around the house, even though surely she must have some idea where the money's coming from. But perhaps the greatest aspect of her poor judgment is when she more or less asks Darren to have Luke killed, and after seeing his missing poster and it dawns on her what happened, we never see her with Darren again, and her cutting off of him is instrumental in Darren's descent in the 3rd season, and that all comes back to Darren protecting Luke. And Darren getting into debt and the things he's made do is also crucial in destroying his other connection to a normal life, Rosie. I wasn't a fan of Darren and Rosie in the 1st season, but in this season I like it more in some ways and think it's worse in another. A benefit to this season is Rosie disappearing. She's gone to England to make a life for herself there, and they are trying to be friends. It's after her departure where Darren is flung into debt and at John Boy's beck and call is ordered to kill Stumpy. This eats Darren up and John Boy twists the knife. After the iconic scene where Nidge presses Darren that this has to be done.
There's no way out for you in this, Darren. Straight up, there's no way out. I wouldn't bullshit you. You have to do it, and that's it. You don't do it, whenever happens, and you're thinking, I'm in all this shit because of what? Because of Stumpy. I'm telling you, Darren, you're fucked if you don't do this. Fuck knows what'll happen, but I swear to God it'll happen. And you'll have pissed it all away.
John Boy says it was no skin off Darren's back, he didn't have to do it, and gives him 2,000 euros. This leads us to one of the best scenes in the whole series, where Darren goes to visit Stumpy's mother. He has not thought this out. It's an awful idea. He's sitting there trying to comfort her while being incredibly uncomfortable himself. He's looking at the baby pictures, he's wincing at the idea of her making him a cup of tea. He tries to give her the money that was paid to him for killing her son. This literally is love and hate. He despises Stumpy, loves Rosie, he has no ill will to the mother, he feels for her. We the audience feel for her because while season 1 Stumpy is an awful character, in the early part of the 2nd season we see him with his mother and he's a different person, and I just love these scenes because when we sit down to watch Love Hate again, in our mind we're in for scenes like this.
There's some little Dublin City Council bollocks in his traffic light box and we're taking the piss!
But then you get stuff like this and it's so dour. As much as I dislike the Darren Rosie Stumpy story in the 1st season, but when you get to stuff like this, kinda redeems it. But as for Darren and Rosie themselves, she is thankfully absent for 3 episodes, half the season, and then the music kicks in like the Jaws theme. She's back! But now Rosie is back in Ireland to stay, so the path is clear for them, and these two do have really good chemistry. You believe they like each other, even though sometimes it does fall into that trap where all they talk about is how much they like each other. There are little moments like Darren broaching the topic of babies and it still slightly stinging her after what she experienced. However, to get this good stuff, we have to endure an unbearably long intimacy scene. This thing is largely unedited. In the previous season, these scenes were done via a montage, or in subsequent season, the scenes we do see have little character moments sprinkled in there.
You were in the top 10. If not higher.
Or they are integral to the plot. This thing goes on for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And while that is familiar to me, later seasons like the 4th were castigated for an excess of scenes of Nidge getting in and out of cars or shots of Dublin Port. But this thing grinds the pacing to a halt, and if you cut the whole thing out you wouldn't lose anything story-wise, the show would just be better. Other shows just indulge in these moments because there's a build-up that these people are finally getting together, but Given that these people are getting back together, it's reasonable to assume something like this has happened already. Darren and Rosie is better this time around, but it is the weakest part of this season and the parts of the rewatch I like the least. But in the broad scheme of the things, if you treat all the stuff with Rosie and all the stuff with Mary as backstory for who Darren is in the third season, it's all valid. In that sense, it is like The Godfather Part 2, where at the end of the story the main character has triumphed over their enemies, but in so doing has alienated themselves from those closest to them. But it really doesn't feel like that, because the season ends in a way that leaves it up in the air as to whether or not he'll get back with Rosie, and you really don't learn he's lost touch with them both till the third season, just through little lines of dialogue.
I thought you were in London. No, not anymore. No, I'm done with that. And Rosie's still over there. I'm done with that as well.
In an interview, Stuart Carolan did say considerations of which actors were available to them were considerations in how he would write a new season, so it's possible he was referring to Ruth Negga or Ruth Bradley, but the show gets by fine without them, and seeing how everything goes for all the other characters, it's a nice idea that at least 2 people make it out of this thing unscathed. But easily the most enduring aspect of Darren's story from this season is the new character we meet through him who became a lot of people's favourite.
I did a 4-year degree in chiropody and podiatry.
It's for your fee.
The Fran we meet in this season is not quite the Fran we all know and love, but that's kind of the point. It's the events of this season that drive him over the edge. He is violent and he is depraved, but at the very least he cares about his appearance, lives in a clean home, runs his own thing, but by the end of the season and into the next, he's dishevelled, living on his sight, and he's subservient to Nidge. Fran is known as being crazy, but in this first season with him, he's really more sinned against than sinning. Fran agrees to let John Boy cover Darren's debt in exchange for investing in a shipment. After a consignment of drugs is seized while being mixed in a hotel and Tommy and Ado and Potsy are arrested, he's understandably concerned about going in on the deal, which John assures him will go off without a hitch, only for it to be impounded. However, when one container gets through, John maintains only his half got through. After being insulted by him, he shoots John Boy, and after that, it's more of a case of Fran fleeing John Boy's gang than John Boy evading attacks from Fran. Fran's storyline wraps up in the same manner as how Huey's wraps up in the first season, with a random act of violence. Fran, full of drink after being ribbed by Carl, stabs him with a glass, and I am totally on board with it. For one, it's in keeping with Fran's character, but for two, this is the first of many times where we see him off his head. In the first episode, Fran goes off to a party, but he goes to talk business and leaves when a deal is struck, but presumably the death of his wife and the subsequent attempts on him has driven him off the deep end. But whereas in the first season, Huey's death happens and then John and Darren are all good, in this instance, with Fran out of the picture, John and Nidge are all good, but all good is not good enough for John, and that's what pushes Nidge over the edge. I really enjoy Nidge's story in this season because it's through Nidge's eyes where we witness so much of John's decline. From the get-go, we see Nidge is distressed with how John does business, his casual dismissiveness of Fran.
He could do it himself if he had half a brain.
Double-crossing Fran.
You know there's going to be war over this.
He suggests compensation.
You don't think we should cut him in on a quarter of it?
What am I now, St. Vincent de Paul?
I really love this scene where Nidge is just trying to have an ordinary chat with John, but he can't hold a conversation. He can see John can barely get dressed, and once they mention Huey, a glimmer of hope on Tommy and Nidge's faces where they might be having a laugh again, and once he notices that the vest is on wrong, he's back to the madness. John is still all business, even when Nidge's baby is born. The Christmas episode consists of Nidge and Tommy trying to spend Christmas with their families, and John is pretty much all alone and obsessed over getting Fran killed. Even the incidental conversation is paranoid from John Boy to Nidge.
You know, in Sicily, they write everything down. Don't even trust the pay as you go. That's how come they end up never getting caught.
But what's interesting is, despite how highly strung he is, John never once suspects Nidge. In the second episode, when the hotel is busted, John orders hits on Stumpy and Ado. Tommy is made to suffer, but Nidge is beyond reproach, despite the fact that his reason for leaving, to be with his business partner's wife, is even worse.
I want a pipe bomb going in the house.
Alright.
When his missus is in there.
While the signs are there in season 1 that Nidge is the violent monster he later becomes, this season sort of solidifies it. There's the oft-quoted speech, and it sounds very impressive.
I'll do it, I don't care, I'll get on with it.
But then he has a wobbler over whether or not he can go through with it.
What'll I do, Darren? If there was a way I knew she was upstairs or something I could do it to him.
But he does, confirming he meant every word he said. He really doesn't care about anyone, in spite of the faux concern he shows Siobhan. Siobhan and Tommy have a story this season which, while it seems like the B-plot, is crucial for the overall story. After Tommy is caught by the police in the bust, Siobhan is made carry cash through customs for John Boy's new accounts he's opened with Dave. This was where I learned what a lily white was.
But the only tricky bit is lodging the money, getting her over through customs. You have to have it in cash, so there's no paper trail.
I'll need a lily white.
Siobhan is understandably panic-stricken by the whole affair and does have a breakdown in the airport. Throughout the 5 seasons, Siobhan is the one who suffers the most, and this is the first example of it. And as a result of her suffering, that ultimately leads to her start informing the Gardaí in the 4th season. But the reason we feel for her more so than anyone else in the show is Siobhan is all of 17 years old at the show's start. Sure, she knows what Tommy does. His house is raided after she sleeps over, but someone of that age is bound to make mistakes. She may think there's something enticing about a man like this, and while he can rush to her defense, he can't stand up to his boss on her behalf.
I don't know what else I could have done.
You could have said no.
Tommy is as sleazy as ever this season. It seems he's incapable of not getting involved with women close to his colleagues. He is intimate with Debbie, but he gets all concerned about her. He's uneasy with her being made fun of. He comes to get her from Ado after she's all messed up on drugs he gave her. He even lets her do something for him by making him a cup of tea, which is enough to spook the perpetually wound up John Boy to pick him to carry out the hit on Fran. And the attempted hit brings up an aspect of this show I don't like. They need a driver for the job and they get this guy Mika. This is the first time a teenager is in the show, and it just doesn't deliver on the potential. The kid is instructed to burn the car after the job and he doesn't do it, so maybe it's showing using a kid is unreliable, except the adults are just as unreliable, as evidenced by them all falling asleep at the hotel. But then the kid's just seen being interrogated by the police. John Boy warns Nidge he has to keep his mouth shut, and that's it. Now in of itself it's unremarkable, but on the rewatch I do see it as a recurring issue with this show, that it doesn't deliver on the potential of how messed up it is to get kids involved in this business, but it's more disappointing in the 4th season. But what the season as a whole all builds towards is Nidge taking over.
Did you see it again last night?
The ghost.
And then in the 5th episode, Nidge replays the CCTV to see John standing there. John was looking at his own ghost, and now Nidge is in his place, which when you're rewatching it and you know how it ends, that's neat. But it's pretty cool considering at this stage Stuart Carolan didn't know the ending. The pieces are put in place for Nidge to take over when John changes his legal guy from Pat to Dave. John now has all his account information in a little black book, doesn't do as good of a job of hiding it as he thinks he does, and now Nidge is in command. And while this season showed Nidge's unhappiness with how John did things, the subsequent seasons show Nidge making a lot of the same mistakes. But you can see it even in this show. After they kill Luke to stop him from stalking Mary, Nidge contemplates killing Darren. With Luke out of the picture, Darren is the only one who knows Nidge co-conspired to kill John, and you can see Nidge contemplating it. And then, with himself installed as the kingpin, we get the only season that ends on something resembling a happy ending, where Nidge is delighted playing his Xbox. But if you're binge watching this show, it unravels for him within minutes from this moment at the beginning of season 3.
You mean Darren, man? Give me your right arm to find out who done him. I swear Tommy had fucking tortured him to death.
The 3rd season of Love Hate is commonly referred to as the best one, and upon the rewatch, I would have to agree. This is as good as it gets, and it gets very good. This thing moves at a clip. From the get-go, the main characters are flung into a situation which just escalates the more they try to cover up. Everybody reacts exactly the way people would react to these situations in real life. There is almost no B-plot. Gone are the scenes of, for instance, Nidge and Trish meeting a school principal, or Trish and Mary talking about boys.
I'm so horny. I get up on Shrek.
In this season, apart from some light and much needed humorous scenes with Ado, Nadine and Potsy.
Mel, send a picture of tits to cheer him, will you?
What?
For fuck's sake, it's only a photograph. I'm paying you, haven't I?
Every scene in this thing ties back to the main story, and almost every scene moves it forward with so many people being affected and so many people trying to do what's best for them. And it all leads to a finale which upends the show and changes how you watch it. This season feels bigger in a lot of ways. The camera work is more dynamic, such as this scene where Donna is being followed only for it to be revealed that we are looking at her from inside Fran's van. In the first 2 seasons, scenes with characters out and about in Dublin were done with close-up and minimal extras. Now, these characters are out in the streets and it just feels more real, and at the time this was just extraordinary. This season was coming out around about the same time Netflix was kicking into gear, and it was already a thing that people were binge watching American hour-long dramas. Stuff like Walking Dead, Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones were at their peaks, and it was just mad you could go from watching these things to something made so close to home and there being no adjustment period. Usually whenever you go see an Irish movie at the cinema, you've to sit through about a whole minute of production company logos because the funding is so disparate for this stuff. That's an observation and not a criticism, as clearly my time isn't that precious since I spent an evening recently watching a show I've already seen to make this video. But when you put on Love Hate, by the time of season 3 there was no notion of our little prestige drama that could. This thing could go toe to toe with the best stuff from America for your attention. The jump in quality is potentially due to a larger budget, which may also serve as an explanation for something else that changes this season: the music.
What is it?
Guns N' Roses.
Up until now, the music in the show was mainly late 90s, early 2000s hip-hop and R&B, such as Biggie, although oddly enough just the tracks from the 2 posthumous albums, Jay-Z, Kanye, Ja Rule, Ashanti, R. Kelly and 50 Cent. A lot of 50 Cent. Now, it's the likes of Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and other classic rock and pop songs. A change I have mixed feelings about. I feel like the previous season, the background music was the sort that the characters were listening to. Nidge has a Tupac poster, and John has a tattoo of one of his songs, and he puts him and Biggie on his Huey painting. And a lot of the soundtrack emanated from a source within the show, like a car radio or a stereo, like in The Wire. Whereas now it's changed to the music you would assume the people who make the show like. If it was just a case of basing my opinion on music I prefer to listen to, obviously then I would prefer the soundtrack of the first 2 seasons. And for the Irish rap fans among you, season 2 did feature Lethal Dialect on the soundtrack. However, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that these opening montages are much more purposeful now as they're being edited to these classic tracks. This is a change that stays with the show till it ends, and it is a net positive because some of these intros are quite well done. Dublin has never looked better, and it's just as well because the story of this season could only be told here. As for what the story is, this season begins with the first flash forward in time where Darren, Nidge and Tommy are looking at something. The story then begins proper when the IRA mistake Ado for someone else and shoot him in the leg. Knowing all too well that he's outgunned, Nidge decides to do nothing. This aggravates Darren, who gets fired up on drugs and pipe bombs the IRA pub. Nidge, in a desperate bid to stop them from retaliating, goes for a few drinks with them on St. Patrick's Day, and he can't get rid of them. And when the old man Git does what he does to Siobhan, he's killed by Tommy and Darren, leading us to now seeing the opening scene again. The body is buried, and the rest of this season is Nidge trying desperately to hide what happened, and the whole thing falls apart. The first 2 seasons, the first in particular, told stories which I thought just so happened to take place in Ireland rather than being about Ireland. This is wholly out of the window this season. For one, the IRA are the main antagonists, not that that's exclusive to stories in Ireland, but for 2, we actually hear, albeit briefly, Irish being spoken.
Sláinte.
But what I find most inspired is having Patrick's Day being the day the story kicks off, because it is the perfect excuse for people being drunker than usual, particularly for those who believe themselves patriots. While St. Patrick's Day is celebrated all around the world, in the unlikely event anyone is watching this outside of Ireland, I cannot overstate just how bonkers Dublin city centre is on this day. At least that's what people who leave their house tell me. So, to talk about this story, one has to talk about what happens to Siobhan, because it is what it all comes back to.
Hey, give us an old kiss, will you?
Now, if somebody is writing a story and they can write it without including this, they should. In some cases, it's just done for shock value. There's been backlash even in cases where it's done merely via an allegory, like in Maleficent. Cat Williams told of standing up to studio heads to have a scene involving it removed from Friday After Next on the basis that it is never funny. And when a scene of it came up in the Nostalgia Critic Anniversary special, it was filmed despite protestations of the people who performed the scene, and it was not funny there either. Then again, Cat Williams says a lot of things, and nothing the Nostalgia Critic has ever made has been funny. However, this season deserves the credit that the way this subject is treated is anything but flippant. The scene of the event itself isn't even the most painful thing for me when I watch it. There is scene after scene of Siobhan describing how it made her feel, physically and mentally. Treatment she has to receive in relation to it. But above everything else, I think what validates this is it feels like it was written because Stuart Carolan had something to say about what would happen if something like this happened in this world. Because it happens in this world, she is sworn to secrecy. She can't talk about it with anybody. When she does talk, the moments where she's approaching something cathartic, she has to cut herself off for having said too much. The one time she does confide in someone, there are huge repercussions. But the way the people around her treat her as well. This is the season where Nidge stops being funny.
Get her some tablets, she'll get over it. You go around dressed like a mutt in heat, and some hound will try and get up on you and give you a poke.
Because Nidge is incapable of thinking about anybody but himself. When it happens, he just wants her to shut up.
Shut up, will you, Siobhan? We have to figure out what to do. Nidge!
He does not want her going to the clinic and makes the flimsiest justification.
What's she want to get an AIDS test for? He was married, wasn't he?
He expects her to keep it together under police questioning. He invites the son of the man who did it to her birthday. He blames Tommy for not taking her home. He maintains Tommy just has to keep her happy. And while Nidge doesn't have a leg to stand on, he'd have less ammunition if Tommy had a bit more restraint.
Another thing, you're barred from seeing a junkie.
For all intents and purposes, this is Tommy's last season, and his behaviour is even more deplorable this time around. Tommy has continued an affair with Debbie, who now works and lives in a brothel. He keeps this going after what happens to Siobhan. He brings his kid in with him, and while this is going on, Siobhan is off saying that he is doing his best. And then only when he's getting around to finishing with Debbie, he goes and gets off with Georgina, the daughter-in-law of the man who forced himself on Siobhan. For once, it looks like Tommy might actually get some comeuppance for his actions, as Georgina is an unstable woman.
What are you watching?
Saw 6.
Perhaps he should have been watching Fatal Attraction. However, when he tells Nidge, who wanted Georgina for himself, Nidge beats him up and you never see Tommy again. Who Tommy is in the 4th season is the shadow of his former self, and he's in a coma for the 5th season, and it just never occurred to me till this rewatch that all Tommy did in this show's first 3 seasons was get off with other women and then get beat up. I really don't remember thinking about just how terrible Tommy is. I remember liking him, and I still do. And I really think that's all down to Killian Scott as an actor. Early seasons of Love Hate were criticised for casting actors who were too pretty and that they weren't representative of what these guys are actually like, and...
Well, you better tell me what the story is or you get a breeze block across the head, you hear me, Luke? I'm sorry.
Maybe Tommy isn't convincing as a criminal, but he's very charismatic.
Do you have one of them days?
Don't talk to me. Today's one of them. Then I go home, smoke a joint, and hopefully wake up, and tomorrow's another day.
The relationship between Tommy and Debbie is comparable to watching a car crash in slow motion. He's a criminal with a kid and a girlfriend, and she's a prostitute addicted to heroin. Is there any version of this that would work?
If we didn't already have Leighton, it'd be different.
You'd run away with me, would you?
Coma Les Shin, she is living above the shop and her hours are unlikely to be 9 to 5, so it really all comes down to when Tommy wants to see her. She taunts him with how her relationship with him isn't all that different from her relationship with the other men, he just doesn't pay for it. Earlier I mentioned the opening montage is set to classic rock and pop songs, and to my mind one of the best ones is set to Angel of the Morning by Juice Newton, where we see the contrast in their lives. Debbie is going from client to client and the strain is wearing her down, both mentally, but even in the brass tacks terms like her jaw, while Tommy enjoys a cigarette on the balcony of an apartment most Dubliners would give their right arm for. She gets some relief from looking at a flower Tommy bought her, and this is bookmarked by the end of the episode where she brings one to him, only now their relationship has ended, as has the life he has known till now, as has anything interesting happening with Debbie, as for the rest of the show she's kind of just there till she ODs in the next season. Tommy doesn't wake up till the 4th season, and his storyline there is one of the best aspects of that season, whilst also being a tough watch.
What?
Someone's kneecapped Ado.
What? Who done that?
The Ra.
The Ra? Man, this is beyond me.
I really like the IRA as antagonists, because if you look at any of the people who've gone after each other in this show before, or even if you look at the baddies in Kin, these people are all just criminals out to survive, and it's really all about money. With the IRA, on the other hand, in these people's mind what they do is about something more, even if nominally they behave the same way as Nidge and his gang. Tony puts bank robbing and fundraising in the same sentence. When Dano is kneecapped in the following season, the justification is he's an embarrassment to the cause, but Nidge is totally outgunned. When Ado is shot by mistake, Git isn't upset because Nidge might retaliate, he's upset because of how it looks in the papers, and Nidge is made even more aware of this by having to bring their guns in. He knows all too well the sort of firepower they carry, whereas his is such a small group. It's partially because his is such a small group that Darren is so fired up to pipe bomb the pub. Ado feels close to him. This season we see Nidge brought in for police questioning, and he is cackling like a hyena, because there are rules and he knows them, and at the very least no one can snipe him in an interview room. Incidentally, this season is where we meet Carter Terry, although he doesn't really become a player to the following season. However, in all of Nidge's dealings with the Ra, everything is dictated by them, and every time he goes to see them he could be taken out at any moment. There are 3 main IRA men who Nidge has to contend with, and each is more intimidating than the last. Git is exactly as terrifying and loathsome as his actions. He's played by a man named Jimmy Smallhorn, and he's terrific because he plays him like a dormant volcano. You watch him thinking he could kick off at any minute.
Bitch knows where we are. Will you hurry up and open up?
While he is a monster, he is not an idiot. He can recognise that Nidge is afraid of him, and that he can be manipulated into importing guns for him, and potentially taking the flak if it's impounded. Considering his death is what launches the story of this season, he really isn't in it much, but he sticks out vividly in my memory. While he portrays himself as a nobleman and a man of modest means, nobody is fooled, except of course his son Dano. Dano is more intimidating because while he, like his father, believes that he is serving a greater cause, and that it's beneath his organisation to have his guns coming in on the same ship as Nidge's hash.
I want you mounting after anybody who came in with your drugs, yeah?
It's only hash, Dano.
Dano believes not only in the cause, but in his father. The mere notion of his father committing adultery is enough to get him to knock Nidge out. While his mother never says anything about Git, the way she behaves gives the impression she knows more about her late husband than she's letting on. In spite of everything Dano says about how his mother can't be left on her own and isn't doing well, we never see her grieve. She seemingly isn't moved by Dano's attempts to find his dad's remains to give him a proper burial. The only thing she expresses concerns about is his pigeons. It's almost as if he's willing himself to believe that his mother is deeply distressed, whereas the one who is really distressed is his wife Georgina, and his behaviour is what contributes to it. He's an alcoholic, but the only thing that gets him to stop drinking is getting revenge. Whatever this man is fueled by, it's never anything good. Dano is played by Jason Barry, who some may recognise from Titanic, and he gave a surprisingly frank interview about his struggles getting work, which I'd recommend watching if you can endure Brendan O'Connor. It's also sadly one of the only cast interviews you can watch in full. The rest of them on the Saturday Night and Late Late Show can only be seen in the shortest of clips. The longest love-hate interview clip is listening to Joe Duffy talk about why he hates it. Isn't that wonderful? But the one who poses the greatest threat of all to Nidge, perhaps, is Tony. Tony, who comes to Dublin after Dano asks for help from the organisation up north in finding out what happened to his father. On that note, I like that when he drives up, they show you the Boyne Bridge before any road signs, since that is one of the landmarks that indicates you're going up north. The people watching here at home will be that one step ahead of the people watching internationally. But with regards to the help Dano does get from up north, Tony is just smarter than Dano. He asks better questions and can put together a larger picture. Unlike Dano, Tony is not blinded by love of Git and seems to have an inkling of what he was like. He specifically asks Nidge if there was any trouble with the women at the brothel. And when he finds out what happened to Siobhan, he is not one bit surprised. In the Ireland these men come from, Gardaí who had drinking problems and priests who abused children were moved from parish to parish, as opposed to the perpetrators getting the help they need or the victims getting the justice they deserve. Would this organisation, which operates outside the law to begin with, be any different? In the 5th episode, these people come together to celebrate Ray, finally receiving compensation for being abused as an altar boy. There is a great scene where he's searched by the Gardaí and the police says,
"You've a lot of notes in here for a fella that's not working."
But while they are delighted justice has been done, they are also coming together to avenge somebody who inflicted the same crime on someone else. But perhaps Tony's greatest weapon against Nidge is convincing him they can do business, while Dano's attempts on Nidge's life is what pushes him to make a payment to the IRA and offer to keep the arrangement going where he imports their weapons. Had it not been for Tony's calm demeanour, Nidge would have tried to skip the country, even if, as he said himself,
"It's as easy get me in Spain as it is here."
Whether they are with the IRA or with Nidge, everybody comes out of this season having lost something. On the smaller level of your pet freezing to death because you were being questioned by the police, or on the ultimate level of the loss of your own life. But Tony emerges from this season having gotten the answers he was hoping to Dublin to get, a means of bringing in weapons and a steady stream of income. Tony gets one more thing he wanted as well, a head on a plate, and the head he chooses is Darren's.
It's all too much, man. It's all too much.
This is Darren's best season. This is the season where Darren's poor judgment is brought to its most logical conclusion. Many people in this line of work will get themselves killed. Darren's route towards it is expedited because of his heart and his sense of right and wrong, as Nidge said himself.
He go to hell for you. Do whatever you ask him if you're his mate.
This is who Darren is. However, now, with no brother, no sister, and no girlfriend, it's as if this is all he has left, with seemingly little to live for. It is no surprise that Darren is now on all kinds of drugs. Nidge says,
He hears things, you know that, Darren?
Voices?
Yeah, all that.
Now, perhaps this is just a throwaway line, and certainly Nidge isn't a reliable source of information, but perhaps it is true, and something this show does well, not just this season, but the whole thing, is omit information and leave you to draw your own conclusion. We never see Stumpy admit he tried to kill Darren of his own accord, so maybe John did order it. Ado asked Dave to call Nadine to take his budgie inside. Nadine says she got no message when Ado was distraught. Maybe Dave rang, maybe he didn't. And maybe Darren did confide in Nidge that he hears voices, because this is certainly a man not in his right mind. Having had the experience last season of visiting the mother of the man he killed, he now goes for a pint with the man he's being paid to kill. And when Elmo cops what's going on, Darren gives him a pass in exchange for information to assist him with killing his cousin. And this is the man where the last time we saw the two of them together was when Elmo tried to kill him. However, I'd imagine in Darren's mind Elmo was strong-armed by Huey and he ultimately isn't responsible. It is then more wounding when the two men who are tasked with killing him are the ones he saved. Twice in Elmo's case, but in the previous season the order to kill Ado was what Nidge deemed a step too far. Perhaps it was because Nidge did so that Darren never suspects Nidge is ordering him clipped. That were it to be requested, Nidge would push back. He is saved only by Elmo and Ado not being efficient hitmen, but he is killed by somebody who shares his values.
Do you hate him? I miss me brothers more.
Lizzie is somebody where family is as important to her as it is to Darren. Anybody who touches her brothers is fair game. She has feelings for Darren and is awkward in how she expresses them, and he clearly cares for her too, but not in an intimate way. We also see Darren declining Siobhan's advances. However, you can see him getting with one of the prostitutes, something he used to avoid.
He didn't go near the hookers. Didn't even get a lap dance, did he? Must be in love.
Perhaps Rosie really was Darren's only love. But the brief glimpse we get of Lizzie when she shoots him, she's neither happy nor sad. This is cold and rational, which is also why I really dislike what they do with her in the 4th season. I do think what happens with her later is inconsistent with her character, but I'll share my thoughts later. However, one new character introduced this season whose writing remains consistent throughout is Donna. Donna is an interesting one, because Donna isn't really likeable.
Something happened to me, but I can't say who did it and who was it. Donna, what did I say? Sorry, Owen. I'll shut up.
However, what Donna does by going to the police to report what Nidge said to her...
You say another word about it to anyone, you fat bitch. I'll personally spray paint your fat fucking face with acid, do you hear me?
She actually does the bravest thing, and she suffers the repercussions of doing that. It appears too that the actress suffered also.
The character of Donna in the last series, there was a fascinating thing where the actress was labelled a rat by people in the streets, and she kind of is the bravest person in the entire show, or has been, or commits the bravest act, in that in the face of being told she's going to have acid thrown in her face by the gang, she goes to the police and says, my friend has been raped and I think it may be this man. And that takes incredible courage. It was an incredible act of bravery. Yeah, but it's funny that she was on social media, she was labelled, the actress was labelled as a rat, and that code of silence, or that code of betrayal and of keeping her mouth shut is quite extraordinary.
However, the reason she was threatened in the first place is fallout from her doing exactly what her best friend told her not to do. She told someone else Siobhan's secret, so it leaves us, the viewers, with a bit of a conundrum, because if one of our friends breached our confidence with somebody that they literally just met, we'd condemn them. However, if we heard of somebody making a statement to the police, in spite of all the potential danger that comes with it, we would applaud them. But on a purely personal note, totally unrelated to the show, I just like that Donna's fancy dress costume is a Navi from Avatar, because it is the counterpoint to the stick that people beat that movie with, that it had no cultural impact. Donna is also kindly offered to have her paint licked off her by somebody who takes on a greater prominence this season.
Are you a dog bird or a ladybird?
After his stint in prison, Nidge gives Fran a lend for wholly self-serving reasons.
Let him kiss me arse and tell me I'm a great fella.
However, it appears to be a shrewd move when Fran is able to come to Nidge's aid. But despite having land, a van and a penchant for violence, perhaps Fran's greatest gift to Nidge is that he is a yes man. Conflicts between these two come to characterise their relationship later, and it is when Fran starts to push back on Nidge that their relationship begins to deteriorate. But in this season, Fran does not question or call out Nidge for the same things Darren would, even though the things Nidge does are reprehensible.
You're me buddy, yeah?
This season is further illustration that when Nidge gives the speech in season 2, he was telling us exactly who he was, whereas in the last season, John Boy got himself into bad situations and made them worse. Nidge does not get himself into this mess, but he makes it messier and it grinds him down. What he jokes about in the first episode:
Fran, this is Linda. I'm speaking to you from beyond the grave, you bleeding thicko. Nidge was giving it to me up the guitar, Fran, and I loved it.
he is acutely sensitive to in the last.
Bang bang in and out.
Like you and his missus.
Darren, I don't want to hear that again. I'm serious. I know you think it's funny, but I've enough to be going on with.
Only taking the piss, Nidge. Relax.
Yeah, but I'm wound up enough as it is, alright?
I won't mention her again.
Don't.
Well, it is true that almost immediately after taking over from John Boy, he's flung into a mess and he himself never recovers in the rest of the show. One thing I do enjoy is we see him looking very indifferent in the opening montage of this season, despite business booming and no immediate threat. Gone is the happiness from the previous season's end. So I like the idea that despite the fact that Nidge is either miserable or furious for seasons 3 to 5 as a result of all the situations he finds himself in, this little montage at the start of the season before things tumble confirms that, even if all went swimmingly, it would not be a happily ever after for this man. But this season he demonstrates that there really is no core to him. You just sort of peel back layers and layers. As stated earlier, he is staggeringly insensitive to Siobhan. However, in spite of his rage at everyone else for making hiding the truth from the IRA more difficult, he actively invites a target on himself by trying to sleep with Dano's wife Georgina. He is saved only by the fact she's not attracted to him. However, he develops something of an obsession with her. In his previous and subsequent affairs, he treated them as such, and the women knew he still went home to his wife. But with this one,
we're kind of separating, and I'd say she's had a few alright now.
He purchases Trish the same clothes she wears, which when Trish finds out upsets her massively. What's interesting is Nidge says he never saw Georgina wear this, and that's true. The 2 occasions he met her prior, she wasn't wearing this. So maybe his indignity at Trish's anger is justified and he genuinely did see it in a magazine.
J-Lo wears it.
However, he has been stalking her Facebook, so he probably saw it there. However, his lust for Georgina causes him to boil over and beat the hell out of Tommy, upon receipt of the news that Tommy was intimate with her.
That man was like a bleeding witch getting into me head. It was like fucking voodoo or something.
Yeah, it was all her fault for having a pair of tits.
He said it was a mistake.
The way Nidge responds to this is handled primarily in the 4th season, and while in this season we can see him struggling to live with himself over it after the attempt on his life, still clad in his bulletproof vest, Tommy is the one he goes to see before Trish. But in the aftermath of the event happening, he uses this situation to get back in Trish's good books.
Because it's like now, after what's happened with Tommy, you realise what matters, you know?
Not that she would ever leave him, however, because I think Trish really is in it for the goodies. From the very first episode, she seems to know Nidge is unfaithful to her. She gets this confirmed in the 4th episode, but she stays with him and has another kid with him. Why? Well, we see her trying on lots of new clothes and getting her hair done up. Perhaps that's what it's all about to her, and it's a mutually beneficial arrangement because Nidge really does need her. While this season we see Darren having to run from his apartment with nothing but the shirt on his back and spend the rest of the season living in less than ideal circumstances in Ado's flat, Darren never seems to care much for high flying. Were Nidge put in these circumstances, this show might end a lot quicker than it already does.
Does he love Trish?
No.
I think he's the kind of man who would be lost without her. He's the kind of man, if she up sticks and left him, he'd be devastated and he wouldn't know what to do. He's that kind of man, one of those men who gives out about his wife internally and then actually when she's gone he'd be lost.
While having to live with what he did to Tommy affects him more in the 4th season, and by this season's end his pocket is lighter, both in terms of paying off the IRA and Ado informing him people are slower to pay off debts. Now he is seen as less intimidating in the streets after his run-in with the IRA. His supreme punishment is having to live with ordering a hit on Darren.
Darren, what's the story, brother?
What's the story? I'll tell you what the story is, Nidge. You just tried to have me clipped there and you missed.
I don't know about the rest of you, but Love Hate's one of those things where, because of how popular it was, unless you were watching it week to week the moment it was airing, the whole thing was spoiled for you.
We have also Darren, poor Darren, who got shot and was tried to kill by Stumpy.
So Darren's death had its impact lessened, let's put it that way, the first time I saw it, but rewatching it, it is really well done and it is the best handled of the main character deaths. In the previous season, the 5th episode leads you to believe that Darren, Nidge and Luke are carrying out a hit on Ado and pulls a bait and switch when the gun is turned on John. And in the 5th season, while it's pre-established that Patrick is out to get Nidge, the episode itself has you believe it's building towards Nidge's arrests. This episode takes a different approach. This episode tells you Darren is going to be killed before the second ad break.
So what's his name? Your buddy.
Darren?
We see Nidge having to let it dawn on him what he's having to do to survive. This is really the only time we see Nidge just break down and cry. But then when the hit fails, it seems like Darren might get away, and why wouldn't he? He is the main character. The season ends with him being shot on the head, and I can remember the Facebook statuses and conversations people had where they thought Darren survived this, bolstered by the news that Robert Sheehan was acting in the 4th season, only for it to be his scene in the morgue. But killing off the main character just wasn't as common when this aired, even if it did rapidly become a thing in the good telly from this decade. Darren's death changes how you watch the show, because now the main people we follow for the rest of the show are the people who betrayed him, with the exception of Fran, and it is after this that the police are introduced as main characters, so if you no longer wish to root for them, you don't have to. And thus the curtain is brought down on the best season of the show. Definitely when I first saw the show, my fondness for John Boy made me give the nod to season 2, and I had that DVD on rotation a lot more, but unquestionably this is the best one. It's so addictive. When I sat down to rewatch it for this, the plan was to have the laptop open and take notes. Almost no notes were taken, and I just watched it in a sitting. And on a personal note, of all these love-hate videos, this was the most enjoyable to make because there really isn't anything to whinge about. I just get to talk about something I love. Critically, this season was reviewed very enthusiastically. Joe Duffy hated it, so that'd be so bad then, can it? And as for views, off the back of this, the ratings for the opening of the season after this were the highest the show had ever gotten. What people got, however, many saw as a dip in quality in season 4.
So fucking tired all the time. I swear if someone shot me now I'd be happy.
The 4th season of Love Hate is not regarded by any as the best, and some people think it's genuinely bad. Speaking personally, I know one person who stopped watching the show at this point, and another person who caught a few episodes this season on television and dismissed the show entirely. As for me, I was underwhelmed by this season when I first saw it, although there's a caveat. I somehow managed to skip episode 5 without realizing it, and didn't notice till I rewatched the whole show, so at first viewing, I wasn't a fan, but I sort of shot myself in the foot by not watching it properly. All I had to do was sit in front of a screen and look at it, and I still managed to find a way to do that wrong. Nonetheless, after a couple of rewatches, I have sort of come around to it. However, myself and the people that dislike this season are in agreement on something. Not a whole lot happens, but that is kind of why I like it. What the season builds towards is anticlimactic in many ways. However, there is one aspect of it which I feel is purposefully anticlimactic and I enjoy it, but the rest undeniably is anticlimactic. I think where the season fundamentally falls down is by not doing something each and every other season does. According to Stuart Carolan, he attempted to close each season with the idea that were the show to end there, it could. And I have witnessed this working. In our house, we only had the first 3 DVDs, and my dad took them with him, and he thought it ended there. He only found out later that it went on for another 2 years. One would assume the idea from Carolan's perspective was not banking on another season being greenlit in the first couple of years. However, by the time of the 4th season, this is pretty much the most viewed thing in Irish television history. And around 1 million people are watching this thing, which for context is maybe 1 in 5 people, and those figures didn't include people like me who were working in the pirate sector. This is when you start seeing really crap Facebook memes, which were a bit of fun at the time. You get a police review when a Garda named Kieran plays a Garda called Kieran. Still not the worst thing Martin Callanan did in his time as Garda Commissioner. The Irish Dental Association feels compelled to distance itself from how dentists are portrayed in this show. And you get outcry over the silliest things like a cat being killed. They actually got this cat to appear on the Late Late Show to alleviate people's concerns. This was the season airing when I remember Love Hate being discussed most widely, which is amusing because this is the season least remarked upon since the show ended. But when you've got a crowd so big you get loopers who can't tell, no animals were harmed in the making of this production, it's safe to assume Stuart Carolan could think beyond just one season. While the weaker aspects of the first season could have been attributed to RTE not having enough faith in the project, and certainly we love to blame everything on RTE, at this stage, with strong reviews and increased revenue from DVD sales, you have to imagine he is getting to make exactly the show he wants to make. With this in mind, this is the only season where rather than thinking about the next 6 episodes, Carolan was thinking about the next 12. He said in an FM 104 interview that he envisaged season 4 and 5 as one story. That being said, for many reasons, I think it might have been better to do one big 12 episode season and call it a day, or at the very least do the final season in 2 parts as was done with The Sopranos and Breaking Bad. Because when you get to the end of this season, it tries to show some form of an end to the story, but there isn't as much story to end, and there's still threads left dangling. So yes, this season is slower paced, it's not as tense, it's at times more like a collection of scenes and little stories rather than one large narrative, and the characters finish the season in largely the same position as they were in when the season started. However, in talking about this, Stuart Carolan used an analogy about vegetables and dessert. The audience think they just want desserts, i.e. big moments like character deaths, people getting off with each other, revelations and arrests, but too many of those are bad for the show. And you need a certain amount of establishing and bedding in. And this idea is to be admired. Certainly shows that keep ramping things up tend to burn out, like with Weeds, which burned out quite literally with a season finale that involved a gigantic fire, and from which the show never recovered. Or maybe it did. I gave up on it soon after. So yes, season 3 was firing on all cylinders, but it is perhaps a bit greedy after it to say, you've just made one of the best seasons of television in this country's history. Can you do it again, please? But having said that, in the case of season 4, there is some great stuff here. This season has some of the best moments, some great ideas, it introduces some good new characters, it has some of the best quotes.
Fuck you, Nolly. I'm pissing on your ma.
And this is also the season where Nidge is at his nidgiest.
Please, just let him go, will you?
What'd you do? Someone in that didn't pay their bills, you'd call it guards, wouldn't you? Yeah.
But if I'm honest, what my enjoyment of this season might boil to is this, if nothing else. In trilogies, whether they're the best or not, the middle chapter tends to be the most enjoyable, because as opposed to the first, which sets everything up, or the last, which tears everything down, the middle is always the one where you're just thrown into the story and you get to spend time with the characters you like instead of spending time establishing stories or bringing them to an end. And this season is like that. It is the one where the least amount of consequential stuff happens. And amusingly enough, since this is Ireland, in between 3rd and 5th years of high stress and tension, year 4 is the transition year, or in Irish, Rewatch on Nidgerbhliain, for better or for worse. So shall we begin?
Yeah, fuck it, let's do it.
The season begins with two teenagers, Wayne and Ginny, playing with a submachine gun. Wayne tells Ginny he's been given the gun to mine for a job taking someone out. He asks who, and then it cuts to Nidge. And then, the same moment happens again an episode later with two Gardaí. One tells the other he's taking someone down. He asks who, and it cuts to Nidge. And I feel like previous seasons would have put these two scenes back to back.
Go on, tell me. Who is it you have to clip?
Taking someone down.
Who's the target?
Both these scenes establish the people after Nidge this season. Wayne working with Liz on Dano's behalf, and the police on behalf of, well, the rule of law, I guess. So it is a departure, I think, that they're not both set up in the first programme. Each previous season and the season subsequent to it set out their stall in the first episode, but the police putting their case together, the thing which takes up most of this season, isn't established till episode 2. We meet Moynihan in the first episode, but he doesn't get the team together till the second. So why are Wayne and Ginny the first people we meet? Bearing in mind the very last frame of this show before this was Darren's corpse, so a lot of thought would have been put into what we see first in series 4. Well, in another FM 104 interview, Stuart Carolan mentioned something he wanted to accomplish with this season was to address a concern he had that young boys saw something glamorous about this show and the lifestyle it portrays, and this being an impetus for him to tell a story involving teenagers. Now, in previous videos I've alluded to finding this whole story involving Wayne and what it attempts to say about teenagers in this world to be a massive letdown. It appears that perhaps I was wrong. When this story wraps up with Ginny shooting Wayne, I always thought that Ginny killed Wayne for laughing at him for falling off his bike. However, it appears from reading about it that Wayne was killed on Nidge's orders. For one, for his part in the IRA's attempt on his life, and for two, for knowing too much about Nidge's failed hit on Patrick. But there is no scene of Nidge ordering this. There is a scene of Wayne laughing at Ginny for falling off his bike. So the programme showed and didn't tell. Something on which television did more. And it went over my head, and it went over others too. Bernice Harrison's review in the Irish Times drew the same initial conclusion I did. So I guess I'm a bit sore about not getting it, but I have to take in consideration Carolan's comments about wanting to get a message across to younger viewers, because if that was the intention, I think this might be one of the few things that Kin did better.
Exactly. You're a hypocrite.
Like it or loathe it, the first episode of Kin tells a very straight to the point story about teenagers getting involved in this stuff. Amanda and Jimmy's son Jamie has effectively dropped out of school, and questions are being asked about whether he'll go to college or go to work. He insists he wants to go into their line of work. Amanda is staunchly opposed. Jimmy wants to give him a chance. However, after going out once with his dad and seeing what's involved, Jamie recognises it's not what he wants and he fills out a CAO form for colleges. But at the episode's end, standing next to his cousin is enough to get him killed. Now, some may say this is all well-trodden territory. Personally, I think this little story is better than that, but I'll save that for the Kin video. But it's short and to the point, and it does get the cautionary tale across in parlance kids could understand. But with the story of Wayne, I think it's just too ambiguous if the target audience is teenagers. I think what's probably most effective is Wayne looks like a bit of a tit posing with the gun. But also my problem is I wanted to see Nidge get some comeuppance for getting a teenager involved in this. Like he's giving him money, letting him and his friend have a few drinks, putting him in life-threatening situations. It's sick, and if Nidge is the one who orders Wayne killed, it doesn't seem to wear on him at all. In the case of Tommy, Darren and Janet, Nidge's role in their fates weighs on him massively, but with Wayne, after his shooting we see Nidge looking distressed with a cigarette, and that's it. And I just don't think the full storytelling potential of getting young people involved in this is tapped into. Certainly things one could point to was the 20-year-old man in 2008 who dug his own grave before being shot in the head, and many more gruesome examples. As to whether or not teenagers could take any message from this story, for anyone who missed it, a few years ago TV3 did a reality TV show about a bunch of supermodels who ran a Garda station. It was called Inside the K. In it, a member of An Garda Síochána said,
"Like we're seeing 13 or 14 year olds walking around in Canadian Goose jackets worth nearly €1,000 like."
This was in reference to the gifts bestowed upon children in these areas, and it was part of a point being made that it's a form of grooming and it is beyond creepy. However, that whole message seemed to go over a lot of kids' heads. They took the voice clip of the policeman saying,
"Like we're seeing 13 or 14 year olds walking around in Canadian Goose jackets worth nearly €1,000 like."
And they put it over TikToks of them in their jackets. C'est la vie.
Hold on. Now get the flashlight, yeah? Get the flashlight.
Why am I get the flash, right? That's without the flash.
No, get one with the flash.
Right, how do I do it with the flash?
So while the season doesn't show its whole hand in the debut episode, that's not entirely a criticism, because this leaves space for the thing which takes up most of the first episode, the tiger kidnapping. From the previous season, we can see the gang gets their money from drug dealing, debt collecting, and running a brothel. Now we see another source of their income. Nidge has a guy on the inside who drives the van, with the man whose family has been kidnapped. His job is to feign the role of the supporting colleague and to ensure the money is brought to the right location. Nidge and Elmo follow the van, while a group headed by Fran kidnaps the family till the money changes hands. The location they're taken to is a ghost estate. The abandoned unfinished housing estates were all over the place at the time. RTE did a documentary about the people who actually lived in them. The people who bought these houses were shown brochures of what the neighbourhood would look like when each house was built. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by bandos. It's been said the memory of the stark image of these uninhabited ghost towns contributed to the government's slow response to the housing crisis Ireland currently faces, if high demand and low supply meant the likes of this wouldn't be seen again. With this setting, this really does feel Ireland in recession in a way previous seasons didn't, and it is the sort of thing I was on the lookout for when I said the show perhaps didn't acknowledge the recession as much as it could. It is also a kidnapper's dream, in that someone can run for miles and not be seen. The show also does a good job of acknowledging the economic situation with the character we meet after the kidnapping. After the kidnapping, the gang meets at the brothel. While there, Nidge is brought in to deal with a customer who's gotten sick and had an altercation with Janet, and this is where we meet Andrew. Up until now, everyone we meet would seemingly be here even if there was no economic downturn, and it just seemed like an opportunity missed because there are stories to be told about the sort of characters who turn to crime because of it, and Andrew is one of these characters. We definitely would not be meeting this guy without the recession. Andrew is a man who lost out by going into property, and there are so many people in this country like him. Or even we can see the actor here being interviewed by Brendan O'Connor, who in 2007 wrote "The smart ballsy guys are buying up property right now" in his Sunday Independent article entitled "The smart policy guys are buying up property right now." And while it is not explicitly stated by Andrew or his wife, this is potentially why they're separated. Money troubles can lead to that. He clearly still has feelings for his wife, despite his dismissiveness of her not working. You can see this in how he reacts to the prospect of her going out on a date, or how he is with her possessions. Perhaps because he wishes to be back with his wife, that rather than seek a more meaningful relationship, he just chooses to get off with prostitutes to keep him going till he potentially gets back with his wife. However, it is more likely to be for more squalid reasons than that. He'd probably got off with prostitutes regardless. Perhaps the wife knew and chucked him out. Peter O'Mara describes Andrew as a typical Celtic tiger middle-class guy who has fallen down the rabbit hole of his own greed. But backstories aside, I think with the Andrew character, I think this is Stuart Carolan revisiting territory previously visited with the likes of Tommy's friend JP, where it's people on the outside who try to have it their way when it comes to interacting with these gangsters, and it all gets a bit muddled. Whereas John Boy, Darren and Nidge don't deserve what happens to them, they are knee-deep in this world. What they are doing is wrong, and their demise would not happen if they stayed away. But with JP, who just tries to be friends with the gangsters, or Andrew, who at the start at least, just wants to hire a prostitute, nonetheless they both get in over their heads. And to make things even more complicated, neither JP nor Andrew is particularly likeable, so the question of whether you feel sympathy or contempt is even harder to ascertain. So sure, he gets pushed around and belittled by Nidge and Fran, however he himself is way out of line with one of his employees, Anne-Marie. She quite reasonably points out that he is giving his patients the most expensive treatment possible, by making them all get crowns. These were the scenes that the Irish Dental Association took issue with, and he cusses her out and sacks her. His wife extends him an olive branch by telling him that a check bounced, asking him if there's money troubles, and reasonably asking, is this the moment where we scale back our standard of living? He denies there's any issue, until she wants to go away for a weekend, which clashes with his arrangements with Fran and Nidge, and then he rants at her about money troubles, whilst putting himself on a pedestal about how he didn't burden her with them. This is not a nice man. While initially you could say he doesn't go to the police because the only way he'd be able to go is by outing himself as having visited a brothel, he does end up tying his flag to Nidge's mast by offering to come in as a financial advisor of sorts. And he does bring in barrels of lidocaine, which Moynihan and Kieran point out is a criminal offence, so come the season's end, he is complicit. All the same, he suffers a gruesome fate at the hands of somebody who really goes off the deep end this season.
The universe, Nidge. The universe.
Anybody who says Fran is their favourite character is thinking of this season. This is the full Fran. But I have to say, from what I remembered of the show, I remembered Fran as being an almost Huey type character. Huey who delighted in intimidating people and killed for no good reason. Sure, what the audience likes about Fran is echoed by Kieran in the 5th season.
I like Fran. He's a mad bastard.
But there is a method to some of Fran's madness though it may be. In the 3rd season, Fran went from being somebody Nidge loaned money to on a whim to his chauffeur, his provocateur, and his yes man. So at this season's start, Fran is acting as the second command. He is to Nidge what Nidge was to John. And yet, he is more than capable of taking charge of the tiger kidnapping situation. He ensures no cigarette butts are left behind as evidence, and his remonstration of Nidge involving Tommy in the job is borne out by the evidence. Tommy does let one of the hostages out of his sight, where Tommy returns to the home later that day to get caught, and Tommy name drops Fran under police questioning. It's when he's determined to get Tommy taken out that the friction between Nidge and Fran boils over. But Fran does have a point.
Some people can do their time, but it's fucking rough being locked up. And if I have to do it, I'll do it. No problem, Nidge. But doing it for nothing? Because some brain dead fuck is missing a bit of his oblong fucking delate. That won't happen no matter who he's friends with.
So yes, he's a mad bastard, and no, not one of the full-timers. But he's not bereft of logic. Some of the time. The rest of the time he's a scruff. In the tiger kidnapping when the others have balaclavas, he's in a Halloween mask. And no, I do not think this is just what he had lying around. This guy does enjoy that the kids might be spooked. But perhaps the greatest indictment of Fran's character is Dean walks into a pub toilet to see Fran, missing teeth and covered in blood, and there's not a speck of surprise. This is just another day in the life if you're friends with this man. This is where we meet Nolly Hughes, and this is the first of 2 attempts he makes on Fran after Fran slept with his wife while he was locked up. As a result of these attacks, Fran is constantly in pain, he's also paranoid, he's also been smoking Thai stick.
I'm smoking a lot of Thai stick.
And he's been drinking poutine. It is perhaps this cocktail that pushes him to the depths of depravity. Fran wants revenge on Nolly, he can't get him hitting Mountjoy, there's no family to intimidate, but Nolly's mother has recently passed away, so Fran wants to dig up his mother and leave her sitting in Nolly's living room for when he gets out. Now, part of the reason Love Hate is so rewatchable and the reason we go back to it is because it's funny.
Right, Nidge. Darling, this is fucking shit. She's the caterer's in, she still wants me doing the barbecue. There she is now.
But this grave thing is the best stuff.
What I say to the missus? I don't give up bollocks, Carl.
It's gallows humour, and stuff like this is why, for all its flaws, you can't knock this season. However, there is a thin line between love and hate. Same things make us laugh, make us cry. This might be hilarious here in season 4, but what happens as a result of this in season 5 is the stuff of nightmares. Nidge seemingly is determined to make his predecessor's mistakes, and cuts Fran out of the deal when the shipment comes through Andrew's warehouse come this season's end. His justification? Fran's unpredictable, a liability, and a dead giveaway. However, much like John, Nidge expects it to just be accepted because he's the boss, but the real wedge driver between the two of them is Tommy.
Can you get me a fizzy orange?
Tommy's storyline this season, it's just sad. He's either clueless or screaming in pain. He's most comfortable in the company of teenagers and puppies. When he goes to see the girl he kidnapped earlier that day, in his mind, whatever's left of it that is, he's just seeing if she's alright. Upon receipt of the news that she thought Tommy was kind but Fran was scary, is when he name drops Fran. But there is one brief moment of lucidity mid-season.
I can't remember who I am sometimes.
That's just a short clip, but the full version is dreadfully sad. The opening montage of this episode, set to Ramalama Ding Dong, just shows Tommy's life. He sits there with a vacant expression, smoking, stopping only when he gets shakes. But who can we count on to make everything worse? Nidge, when it comes to Tommy, his mind must be going in a million different directions, but all in the direction of self-preservation.
Ah, Jesus, Nidge.
No, he's fucking grand.
He is willing himself to believe that Tommy is okay again. If Tommy's okay again, what he did isn't so bad then, is it? He's putting Tommy in dangerous situations, but in so doing he gets to pay him and put money in his pocket. So then he can't be so bad then, can he? That literally is Nidge's answer to everything. How does he respond to someone having one of their eyeballs cut out and being partially blind for the rest of their life after a hit he ordered backfires?
Look, I'll pay him for the eye.
And Tommy is a father to his grandnephew. He's family.
Family? Who the fuck knocked the bollocks out of him and put him in hospital?
And him and Tommy and Darren were the best of friends.
But did you not have him clipped?
And the fact that Tommy is being thrown into these horrendous situations with nothing resembling his wits about him gets Siobhan to do the thing she previously wouldn't do. Talk to the police.
I'll do whatever you want me to do. To help you get Nidge.
The introduction of the Gardaí this season brings this show closer to The Wire because now screen time is shared with them and you spend almost as much time with the police as you do with the gangsters. The Wire is the highest possible bar to aspire to, but if you're going to ape off of something, you might as well ape off of something that was good in the first place, as opposed to that time RTE decided to rip off something that was rubbish in the first place when they made Fade Street.
How do you not understand? Oh yeah, sorry Danielle, I'm such an uptight bitch.
Comment below if you want a retrospective on that. But as for the influence of The Wire, the opening montage of the second episode, which is set to the birds turn, feels very reminiscent of the intro of the first season of The Wire, with the emphasis on surveillance and the shots of the drug trade and police work carrying on in tandem. Another thing The Wire did that I think these last couple of seasons of Love Hate tried to do is to have each season look at a different institution. So one season of The Wire was about schools, another about longshoremen. With Love Hate, season 3 looks at the IRA, season 4 the Gardaí, and season 5 the travelling community. However, the blurb of the DVD for The Wire season 1 was, there are good guys and there are bad guys, sometimes you need more than a badge to tell them apart. And that really isn't the case here, because these Gardaí are presented as good people with little to no shades of grey. If you want to be petty, you can look at them doing the graffiti to cause strife between Nidge and Elmo, or them intimidating the man Nidge asked to creep outside one of their houses and say they're not doing things strictly by the book. And tragically enough, I did actually find one person complaining about that on politics.ie in a thread from when this aired in 2013. But overall, they're shown to be decent people as opposed to The Wire. Bureaucracy and friction between the Gardaí doesn't become a thing till the 5th season. And while we still go home with Nidge, Fran and Ado, we only see the Gardaí at work, and we only get to see the home life of one of them, Moynihan, the main one, for a very brief period in the next season. And I wonder if a trick is missed here. Certainly with the rewatch of this season and of the next, you do adjust more to the Gardaí and it's easier to root for them, but this was a criticism at the time. It was quite jarring all of a sudden to be spending so much time with them, and I was quietly hoping Nidge would get away with everything. This is natural because you're 3 to 4 seasons deep with him by this stage. But also, what happens to the show if Nidge does get arrested? Does it become a Prison Break style drama where Nidge tries to break out? Who wants to watch this guy break out of an Irish jail? Oh yeah, that was a good movie, wasn't it? But you still spend so much time with Nidge, and I'm wondering, would it have been better to have spent much less time with him and flip the script on who you root for? This is something which has been attempted in other shows. In the Old Wounds episode of the Batman cartoon, the episode is told from Dick Grayson's perspective as he retells the story of why he left him, and right up until the end, it's almost as if Batman is the villain, when you see his attitude towards Grayson and when you see how aggressively Batman interrogates someone in front of their own children. Season 7, episode 3 of The X-Files, Hungry, is told almost entirely from the perspective of the monster, so when the FBI bursts through the door at the end, they're almost the antagonists, not him. And another Gillian Anderson production, Fagin, the 5th episode of the 4th season of The Crown, which is about the man who broke into the Queen's bedroom in Buckingham Palace, after the intro, is also told entirely from his perspective. And when you see how the system is failing him and how his luck goes from bad to worse and he feels compelled to break in, for the duration of this episode, it's almost as if the baddies are Elizabeth and Margaret Thatcher, just like in real life. Were something akin to this to have been attempted, I wonder if it would have worked better or worked at all. After all, this is the sort of storytelling video games do better. But we still spend most of our time with Nidge, and some of the stuff we get is very good, but it's kind of hard to be shocked by Nidge anymore. While Nidge always did terrible things, like pipe bombing Linda after being intimate with her and beating Tommy up, but once he orders the hit on Darren, there is no redeeming him. So for these last 2 seasons, it's just a case of who's going to get him and when. But if you want to root for the police, Moynihan makes it easier.
I want these fuckers put away for a long stretch.
Moynihan is somebody who is genuinely decent, which is not the done thing in a lot of dramas, but that is actually what makes him compelling, and his decency really only becomes truly apparent on the rewatch.
Tommy's not really right, is he? Since he got that terrible beating.
Sure enough, he seems concerned, but is it just because he spots a weak link? Well, once he promises Siobhan he would ensure no harm comes to Tommy, we see who he is. When in the finale, when Tommy collapses in Andrew's warehouse and the consignment is minutes away, he just has to wait a few minutes. He has Nidge red-handed, but the risk Tommy won't make it out is too great, and he calls it in so an ambulance can be got for Tommy as soon as possible, undoing weeks of work and the chance of a lifetime. But then there's this little moment.
There's an ambulance coming for you now, Tommy.
He's a man of his word, for all the good it does him. As for the rest of the Gardaí, Kieran, Gavin and Terry, this is where the rewatch comes good, because you do meet a lot of them in a short space of time, as opposed to the Nidge's gang who you've met gradually over the course of the show. They're at their best when they're trying to cause friction between Nidge and Elmo. They let Elmo go without a charge sheet and thank him for being so helpful. And then graffiti his neighbourhood and Elmo doesn't react well, leaving his phone switch off, which just aggravates Nidge, and he does bench Elmo for a period. However, something I have to say frustrates me about this season is this story arc doesn't go anywhere. This story arc leads to this moment.
I was looking at that graffiti on the wall, and I was saying, thank fucking God that's not me.
What graffiti?
And then nothing. Nidge doesn't suspect the police are onto him, the opposite in fact.
Stupid coppers haven't a clue.
And then in season 5, Elmo becomes the new second in command, so this story arc is great in the moment, but it really has no resolution. But it is fun to watch the Gardaí do their thing, and you can easily root for them to get Nidge. The ones who are decidedly less easy to root for are Dano and Lizzie.
We've only got one chance and I'm fucked if it's tracked back to me.
You know what's funny? In this interview, Quillivan Dunn said after Love Hate 3 she'd be the most hated woman in Ireland, but I have to say, I bear no ill will towards her for killing Darren, and I don't think many do, because her reasoning was sound. He did kill her brother. All our contempt and blame for Darren's death is directed towards the Weasel. This season, she is out to kill Nidge under the nose of the IRA because Nidge is still paying them off, and she is being funded by Dano. Dano has been kicked out of his wife's house, thank goodness, and he's been blacklisted of sorts by the IRA, so he has nothing left except Nidge. However, it's impossible to root for Dano because he's awful, and I am glad that his story is brought to an end here. Dara McManus wrote in The Independent that was a mistake because the IRA storyline had been the most exciting one, but that is precisely why I'm glad it ends here, because any attempt to resurrect it would have been a letdown. Regarding Lizzie, however, while we feel for Lizzie, Nidge really didn't do anything to her. The only time they ever saw each other was at the commemoration, where they didn't even speak. The more I think about it, Lizzie is more pitiful than anything else. She's not working, she has no boyfriend, and evidently struggles in that department, if how she expressed her feelings for Darren is anything to go by, and she has no brothers left. She still has her values. When Nidge's mother dies, in spite of the funeral being the perfect opportunity, that is the one line she will not cross. And it is Lizzie's story this scene that gives us one of the standout scenes of the whole show, not just this season, where Lizzie, accompanied by Wayne, breaks into Nidge's house while he's got a dose. This really is a wonderful little idea. What happens when a gangster calls in sick? For most, a sick day is a mild inconvenience a lot of the time. Nidge, on the other hand, is on the move for half of the season, sleeping in hotels, the brothel, Janet's, anywhere but home. So a sick day isn't just nauseating and taking a toll on his body, it's also frightening the life out of him. And then just through pure luck, having gotten up to use the toilet, Nidge spots the would-be assassin and hides under Warren's bed. Not before grabbing a samurai sword, however, which is just brilliant. If you've been paying attention, this is the Kill Bill replica he was playing with in John Boy's apartment 18 episodes ago. For a brief moment in the 6th episode of the 2nd season, we can see after his death, John Boy's apartment has been ransacked. I always interpreted this to mean every lowlife in Dublin know that there's an arcade machine, TVs and pool tables up for grabs. Seems Nidge picked himself up a souvenir, first come first served. The whole encounter is incredibly tense, because not only is Nidge hiding, he has just spent the past while spluttering and could cough and sneeze at any moment. But also lying under Warren's bed, he is eye level with the landing, and that's pretty impressive considering this isn't a set. This is someone's gaff. The relief when they get out the door is palpable. However, this leads directly into what is one of the worst scenes in the show for me personally. Lizzie, distracted by Wayne, crashes into someone, and after this man expresses his frustration and insults her, there's a random act of violence, and she's arrested. Now, when this happened with Huey, it was very convenient, but at least it was consistent with his character. When it happened with Fran, it was exactly what he would do, and it served a greater purpose to the story. This is none of those things. This is the worst one. At the end of the 3rd season, the little we see of Lizzie after she shoots the man she felt something for, there's no wavering. She's in control. So this is a woman who can keep it together even when putting a bullet in the head of a man she once desired, and now she's getting all agitated over road rage. One could say the death of her brothers has affected her, and that is certainly her legal defense in the 1st episode of the 5th season. But it was closer to the event when she did Darren in, and she just wasn't like this. This is one of those scenes that makes me think series 4 and 5 should have been one long season, because this really only exists so Lizzie can be written out of the rest of the season. And then come season 5, Lizzie being killed off, while a brief scene, it is used to show that Nidge, aided by Terrence and Polly, is getting back on track. So I like that, but there'd be no need for this scene if it was just one longer season. This scene is just used so that Lizzie is out of the picture for the rest of the season, so that Nidge can go home to Trish instead of going to the home of his new love interest, Janet.
What's the towel for?
My knees are at me.
So Janet's in the 3rd season pretty much from the get-go as it happens, but she's just the custodian of the brothel. This season, with Nidge spending the first half on the run and more time with the Brazzers, he gets closer with Janet. Janet is a character Stuart Carolan cares a lot about, and she's given really good material in this season and the next. She's caring, and she's really all Nidge needs, is someone to look after him. But the attraction of someone like Janet, she knows he's married, and she knows he's sleeping around because it's her girls he's with. She knows how his money is made, she's on his payroll. So she is the mythical thing where she sees the full picture, knows not to expect anything, and cares for him in any event. However, amusingly enough, while Nidge is mourning the loss of Darren, he finds comfort in the arms of someone who has Darren's problem, trying to be kind in an unkind business. When Andrew first gets sick in the room, it's put to Janet whether or not she wants to send one of the lads in. She holds back, knowing all too well they'd eat him alive. Only after Andrew has thumped her does she send Nidge in, and even in so doing makes excuses for him. And despite his being Fran from the business, she's still soft on him. The does not compute moment comes when Debbie and Denise overdose, and Nidge wants to leave the bodies to decay. To call the police would blow the lid on the brothel. It's calculated, but not cold, because Nidge is hot with rage.
So we just leave them there?
Yeah.
Can't do that.
Fucking watch me.
Because he can't use Debbie as a mule anymore, something which comes as a bit of a blow to Ado. Ado is quite the character, because he is somebody who, from his first appearance onwards, consistently demonstrates shocking behaviour. He forces himself on Debbie when she's strung out, he's a bit of a voyeur, his eating habits are disgusting, his drug habits are even worse, he betrays Darren, and yet...
Here does the stripper put out, Ado? She'd wanna be out though, she's getting paid.
I'm not a prostitute.
Fucking her.
Shut your fucking mouth.
He might be the funniest character in this whole thing.
Who's banging me, ma?
Who's your mom?
I'm telling you who she is. She's fucking married. And separated. Be fucking more if the husband found out. Use bastards to tell him and all. Ah, fuck that.
I think a lot of people might remember Ado as a character with not a lot of depth, an unremarkable drug addict who says he'll get clean and never does. But this is the season where he's robbed of a chance at redemption. After he uses Nadine's pee in lieu of his own for a drug test, he learns he's to have a baby. Ado is excited by the prospect, although it does seem he's excited by the prospect of kids Landstad, rather than kids with Nadine. He doesn't remember things like her mother being dead, and he consistently misreads the fact that she doesn't want this kid. But when Ado has the near miss with the police in the finale and is faced with the fact he just avoided 20 years in prison, he resolves not only to get clean, but to get out of the life altogether. His justification being he's got a kid on the way. Only be told there's no baby on the way after Nadine went to England. Would Ado have gotten clean and gone on the straight and narrow? Almost certainly not. The more likely outcome is his remaining a degenerate who's nice to his kids, much like his employer.
You're a great lad, Warren, you know that?
It's sometimes just a turn of phrase when someone says the one good thing you could say about him is. But genuinely, the one good thing you could say about Nidge is he does seem like a caring father, and perhaps even a good one. In the second season, upon receipt of the news that Warren is being picked on at school, while what's more wounding to him is the insult to his own ego.
Can't believe it. A child of mine getting picked on.
It does result in him taking Warren to boxing, and is that not a good lesson for a son, to toughen up in response to aggression, even if the father does it for reasons of hubris? I like that in this season we get one scene of him checking on John when he's sleeping, because otherwise all these scenes are devoted to him and Warren. But this scene, for example, when he's with Warren, he's genuinely affectionate, genuinely interested in what Warren has to tell him about his school friends. Contrast this with the scene with the only friends he has left.
He's on that other stuff as well to stop his tits growing. What do you call it?
That's in your post cycle.
What?
What the fuck are you on about?
Nidge had two good friends, and he made a mess of that. He now has the John Boy problem of people who make him feel alone, and despite all proclamations to Tommy and Siobhan about the importance of family, his love of family seems to extend only towards those in his line of work. Upon receipt of the news that his mother has had a stroke, he will not visit the hospital when his brother and the rest of his family are there. Once again, the show omits information, and you get years worth of context purely from facial expressions. Contrast this with Kin, where people do just out and out say what they think of their family members.
I mean, Eric's. He's a good boy. But he's not you.
When Nidge learns his mother has passed away, the look on his face is not one of grief. Instead it's saying, that's all I need now, isn't it? Only in the church, when he comes face to face with it, does he shed a single tear. The little story arc around the death of Nidge's mother does not impact the overall story of the show, but it's good stuff, and it's something the structure and pace of this season permits. It would have been impossible to fit something like this into the mile-a-minute third season. But to be fair, the people who disliked this season didn't dislike it for this stuff. What was a point of contention was, for example, an excess of scenes of Nidge getting in and out of cars, and shots of cranes and the like at Dublin Port. Now the car thing I will defend, one being Nidge is on the move and he is typically switching vehicles, but usually the reason we're watching him get in and out of cars is because the police are watching him get in and out of cars. However, I will not defend the shots of the docks because these go on for a while, and it's not just this. Scenes like this one of Tommy going up and down the stairs go on too long as well. But what at the time was criticised for being anticlimactic, now we have the fifth season, we can see how things pay off and we look at things in a different light. This is true of Nolly Hughes, but it rings truest for Patrick. Whenever you're rewatching Love Hate and you get to the start of the fourth episode of the fourth season and you see this guy, you know you're approaching the end game. Respectively though, while Patrick appears in the fourth episode, Nidge does not fully come to grips with who he is till the fifth episode. The whole episode goes by before Nidge remembers this is the man who made this pipe bomb that hit Fran's house. So if you were the biggest Love Hate fan watching this at the time, you could have spotted it, and to be honest, I'm not sure many did. I certainly didn't the first time, but I took a gander at some of the forums discussing this in October 13 when this aired, and no one mentioned it, not that I could see. What I could see was the Politics.ie forum finding some way of making a chat about Love Hate come back to Charles Haughey, which is amusing in hindsight when you see what the cast of Love Hate did next. Erin Qui, what I find most interesting is when Nidge goes to see Patrick in season 2. I swear I can hear him putting a Dublin accent on.
You know me, fella, I never said nothing about nobody.
Alright, you like this, right? You got about 10 seconds. Then you run like fuck, okay? It's got a proper pop in it.
So perhaps the traveller aspect of Patrick's character had yet to be identified, so this is potentially a continuity error? However, I have a no prize for this. Perhaps the reason Patrick has a Dublin accent in this scene is to conceal his traveller origins, which wouldn't be out of the question, because having listened to a few John Connors interviews, this is something he has done in his personal life. Throughout the 5 seasons, we never see Nidge kill anyone directly. This is the season where we see it's not for lack of trying, and evidently he doesn't have the temperament or the wherewithal for it. His solution to get Patrick to come to the door is to start bashing it down and yelling, and when he does pick up his gun, he can't tell the clip has fallen out. Patrick is the apex of Nidge making the same mistakes John Boy made. From their 2 encounters, Patrick makes it abundantly clear that he keeps himself to himself, that for his business to work he operates almost like a confessional box, lest people be using their weapons against each other. Whereas the IRA weren't looking for conflict initially, they had no qualms about if it went that way.
Think it'd be cardio?
Doesn't matter.
Patrick is more than capable of defending himself, but he genuinely doesn't want to. He has kids to think about. But while at first glance it appears he is fearful of his own life, when you see the 5th season, I think it's more he's trying to avoid what this will take out of him. The depths and the extents Patrick goes to track Nidge down and to defend his family show why this man would want to avoid this situation if he could. Not because he might lose, because of how much it takes to win. However, while Nidge tries and fails to take Patrick out, Patrick then boards up the house and comes to England, only to come back an episode later. And this is the stuff that brings the season down. This is the problem when you know your show has another year and you can spread things out. The only reason Patrick goes to England is to get him out of the way for the finale. So this is the stuff in this season that I don't like. But the stuff I find more frustrating is the stuff that's not in it. At the end of series 3, Nidge is given at least a chunk of his savings to the IRA and has to continue regular payments. Ado is told that people are slower to repay debts, and several €1,000 is left in Darren's jacket. At the very start of season 5, Nidge is flown to Spain to request a loan. If someone saw these two book endings without the 4th season in between, they might think the 4th season consisted of Nidge's finances dwindling, and that is just not shown to be the case here. Whether it's the tiger kidnapping or bringing the shipment in, Nidge is getting money. But it all seems to be business as usual. When Andrew asks for a payment, or when Tommy has legal bills, Nidge just throws money at it. What we do not get is any scene that indicates he's in money trouble, and we really should, because it just adds more tension and gets us more invested. If you look at the battle at the end of 7 Samurai, we're told that 40 bandits are set to attack the village, so each time one is taken out, you're counting it down in your head. Or in the first song in the movie Wonka, as the song goes on, he gradually has less and less silver in his pocket, till the song's end, which perfectly tees up why he gets coerced into staying at the boarding house. Just having more information like this can get us more invested, and I think the opening of season 5 where Nidge goes to Spain, effectively to be bailed out, would hit harder, because it's the loss of his own sovereignty, and would strengthen Nidge's storyline in that season, where he has someone working for him who he can't just boss around, and how that eats him up. Lovehay even gave us a glimpse of what this would look like, with John Boy explaining his finances in response to Fran's pitch for compensation.
And what if he wants the money now?
Don't have it now. That's the truth. You can tell him that. Got cab up me hole. Issuing seizure orders every other day cost me a fortune to contest. They've done me bollocks in all the investments, negative equity, every one of them. And they slapped a tax bill on me that's on top of the gear getting found. What do you think I am? The Aga Khan? Fucking compo money?
So this season 4 chat has been a bit of a ramble, and that's kind of what this season is like. There's so many disparate things happening, and you get to the 6th episode of the season and it's got this cracker of an opening montage with a Fleetwood Mac song, and it's getting you all amped up, but then what's it building to? Patrick getting the boat, Nidge changing his car, meeting with Keith Duffy, not even to sell him cocaine, just to ask if he wants to buy some when they have it. But this isn't a finale, it's the midpoint of a longer story, and that's why I think they really have missed a trick with how this whole thing is structured. If this and the next season were one big piece, and there was an episode a week later, this would not be a problem. This 6th episode is not a bad one. In fact, it is quite good. It is genuinely tense towards the end when there's the question mark over whether Moynihan will bust in to save Tommy or not. But I can see why people thought it was an anticlimax. However, the anticlimax that I enjoy is after his arrest, Nidge is in for questioning, and finally, after pursuing him all season, Nidge and Moynihan come face to face. It's the Heat diner scene moment. And what do they have to say to each other after all of this?
What the fuck you looking at?
Nothing. Because why would Nidge say anything to the cops? And then the season caps off with the scene that, honestly, I think just mystified most of us, where Nidge pees on the guard he's milked to get thrown in a cell, and then starts ripping at his skin and screaming his head off. Is it a nephew because they have no evidence on him? Is it the only place he feels safe? It's a memorable moment, but I'm still not sure about it. And then it's over. What a mixed bag. There's undeniably good stuff, but it's kind of less than the sum of its parts. While the ratings were higher than they had ever been, critically this show was reviewed much harsher than previous seasons. It's even gotten worse reviews than the first season. I think it's much better than that, but I can understand more was expected of it. Audience reception online to this season seems to have been pretty mixed, but it was still love-hate, so we knew he would be coming back. What we didn't know was it would be for the last time with season 5.
What you keep smiling for?
Suits you, being in charge.
Yeah. Doing John, does it?
Maybe a bit.
Love Hate Season 5 is a solid conclusion to the show that I do not care to watch. Season 5 is an interesting one for me because this was the only one I watched week to week. The lead up to this thing was great. Online rumours saying it was going to be 12 episodes, the newspaper showed images of what was supposedly Elmo's funeral, and the papers just ran with the idea that this was a leak. You can even see this article here in the Mirror that says Elmo is due to be killed off in the next season. So on one level there was misdirection about the actual events of the season, but there was misdirection about the nature of the season 2. This is the last one, but it's not marketed as has it. And throughout the season's airing, Stuart Carroll and RTE were saying there would likely be a 6th season, which is good in a sense for preserving the surprise of the ending. Where other shows in their final seasons tie up loose ends and move towards the finale with a sense things are building towards a climax, this still leaves stories unresolved and doesn't immediately scream that it's all wrapping up, which in some instances is effective, but it also leaves spaces for filler too. Despite being the most recent, this is the season that almost feels the most dated to me because of this scene in O'Devaney Gardens. Literally none of this exists anymore. And this is the season that annoys me the most, with this scene where Nidge is dropped off here and then exits a gate here. And this is also the season I've seen the least, so on some level it's more engaging than the rest of it for me because I don't know it as well, and compared to the 4th season, this is much better paced and this has a much tighter story. I think the best illustrator of the quick pace this season is Fran. Not one episode of the season goes by without him either experiencing a close brush with death, the law, or him learning something earth-shattering. Once more, the new characters bring new ideas with them, and out of all 5 of the seasons, this is the best the show has ever looked. According to the Irish Independent, at this stage the budget for an episode of the show is €600,000. The season is nice to look at, but miserable to watch. The second half in particular, the lighting is darker, the stories are darker, the characters are all on the edge, stressed out, worn down, drugged up, crying out, self-harming, and the violence gets unbelievably coarse, necessitated in part by the story moving into a prison. In the second half of the season, there are few laughs and the jukebox soundtrack is skewed for a much more sinister backing track. But this is personal preference, none of this is a criticism. If I had to rank the seasons, I'd go 3, 2, 5, 4, 1. It is very well written, and I think in many ways it's the most logical conclusion to the show. But the later stages of these 6 episodes are just littered with these moments where you know they're coming, and you absolutely dread to see them, whether it's wincing at the violence on screen, or just how draining some of the stress and the emotions are. When it was at its best, this was a show you didn't want to end. The 5th series brings home the message that it needed to. But I'd like to start talking about it with a question I don't feel is very often asked at this show. What's the best episode of Love Hate? It's not a question the show invites you to ask. There's no guest writers, there's rarely a guest director, it's heavily serialized and the episodes don't even have titles. But if there is a candidate for the best episode of the show, I think it might be the first episode of the 5th season, and unsurprisingly, it's mainly because of the writing. This is not a knock by any means, but this series is fairly atypically written. The stories are told linearly, there's no dream sequences or abstractions, there's no great perspective switches, there's only one flashback, and there's only 2 instances of flashes forward in time, the beginning of the 3rd season and throughout this episode. And where season 3 episode 1 began with Nidge in control and ended with him up to his knees, this episode begins with him at his lowest ebb and ends with him on stronger footing. A welcome departure, given that since taking over from John Boy, Nidge has lurched from one disaster to another. After a beautiful intro showing Patrick returning to Ireland, this season begins with Nidge with a scar on his head, flying to Spain. Throughout this episode, it cuts back between Nidge and Ireland in the weeks preceding his visit to Costa del Sol, but each pull back to Ireland is teed up by a line of dialogue related to one of the season's stories. His relationship with Fran, the people out to kill him, the Garda informant, his new employee, and the first bit of good luck he's had in a while. These are the stories that take up this season, and after the much slower pace of the previous season and a year's wait, this really felt like a much needed gear shift. And bravely enough, the programme shows you Nidge's near brush with death, despite the fact that you've already seen Nidge's escape with a cut in his head. So you already know he's going to make it out. This scene is quite tense, and this is a show which is ruthless with killing off main characters. Had we seen this not knowing he makes it out, there could well have been some suspense, and these flashbacks are lined up for us courtesy of the man Nidge has come to see, Terence. Terence is a crucial character for this whole series, despite not being in it very much. Throughout the show, there is an end goal in mind for John Boy and Nidge.
You don't get out, you end up dead.
Bringing enough this way and you could retire. Barbados, whatever you want.
The quote, "You don't get up, you end up dead," was the title of this love-hate retrospective made by Michal O'Hatlig, which I'll link in the description, and that idea of getting out before it's too late is what Terence has accomplished, and it's all in his name.
Gone on to see Terence Big Balls.
Now, characters have had nicknames before, but the distinction I'd make is each previous nickname is the sort a friend gives another friend. Usually just your name, but shortened with the letter O attached.
Dano!
Terence, on the other hand, has a nickname that reeks of the sort one gets from a newspaper. He has been doing this long enough to be so far removed from any business he does in Ireland, he gets to play the front of a legitimate nightclub owner in Spain. This is probably the most menacing out of all the love-hate characters. He has this piercing glare, he never raises his voice, he does the opposite. The angrier he is, the lower his voice gets.
I want to see her at the funeral.
And when he orders the torture and murder of Janet, he is unwavering and possibly even enjoys it. Now, I've never gone in for the argument that this show glamorizes this life, but if somebody made that argument about Terence, you might have to hear them out, because you don't see how his story ends. The last you see of him, he's sitting in a lovely villa in Spain. But this is a good example of wanting what someone has and not how they got it. You don't get to be where he is without having done some monstrous things, and with Janet, he really demonstrates to Nidge what it takes to get to the top. Nidge hoped he would get to Terrence's level without needing his help, and to go cap in hand is bruising to his ego. This season, Nidge and his gang start receiving protection money from a pub called the Pavin. The owner has been getting hassle from locals, so Nidge agrees to be seen there on the regular, and I think this is the stuff he enjoys, to be seen as intimidating and to be paid for it. But when he's face to face with Terrence, he just has to take his dressing down. Terrence may be back in Spain, but there's someone there in Dublin to twist the knife.
I'm not one of your bum boys, Nidge.
Paulie is the perfect mascot for this season because I think he's well written, but I don't necessarily enjoy watching him. After a season sans Darren and Tommy, he's the first competent gangster we've seen in a while. He has his wits about him, he's suave, and maybe a little too suave for Nidge. This is the first time Nidge has had someone he can't boss around, and it eats him up because he's not in total charge. Paulie outright tells Nidge he doesn't care if he lives or dies, as long as his uncle is paid back. It's only natural that he would take Paulie getting with Siobhan to be a personal attack on him. So blinded by rage is he that he can't see the irony of this statement.
She's a fucking slut.
Well, he's flaunted in front of the same people the fact that he cheats on Trish for years, but far be it from me to be in agreement with Nidge, but I hate seeing Siobhan with Paulie too. Siobhan, by this stage, just to recap, has experienced so much suffering for so long, that's probably what prompts her to say this.
I'm sick of being a good girl, Trish, you know that?
Exactly the sort of cliched thing a woman her age would come out with. So for the first time in years, Siobhan actually finds a way to enjoy herself. But it's through behaviour and company which are so clearly wrong, and with a guy who's so obviously awful. I love how the fact that Paulie already having kids and a wife is treated as no big revelation.
I didn't know he was married already.
He's not. He's separated.
Because of course he does. Siobhan being with this guy and taking his drugs would be bad enough, only now it's when she's informing for the police shows she is so much more susceptible to let something slip, which of course she does. But it's really hard to be mad at her for any of it, because she's had to endure so much and she makes a lot of mistakes. But by the show's 5th season, she's maybe 22, 23 and makes a lot of errors befitting a person her age. It's just a cruel twist of fate she makes them in this world. And while I may be speaking about her as if she's a real person, she certainly feels it. What I like about Siobhan is she isn't one of those characters who's written just to suffer. I'm looking at you, Anna and Bates. Because Siobhan is incredibly brave, but at times can be incredibly stupid. And any indulgences she makes throughout the season are incomparable to what she brings upon herself in the last episode. This is her best season, and it's the best season for the only other female character who gets top billing, Trish. There's not been a whole lot to say about Trish till now, but she's not underwritten. She's exactly who this man would be with. The only time these two are happy together is when they're intimate or when they're giving each other presents. These are shallow people. The rest of the time they're angry or bored. But if there was more to her, she'd be with someone else. Trish just wants the nice things and will turn the other cheek. However, by the 5th season, this is easier said than done, and she does start to notice this is not a temporary blip in her marriage. This man is always like this. For the longest time now, Nidge has been highly strung around her, and his justification has always been he's under a lot of pressure.
Under a lot of pressure, Trish.
And where have we heard that before?
Somewhat pressure, that's all.
But in a sense, the Tidge relationship has grown.
There's 2 hits on me.
Now, he's not giving her details of who these people are, but everybody remembers the very first scene of the first episode.
Update me Bebo page.
Updating me Bebo page.
What people forget is the point of that scene is he's hiding that he's watching a tutorial on changing clips in a gun. Now their relationship has grown to the point where he lets her in on a bit more. Another relationship that grows stronger this season is Elmo. However, in spite of all Nidge's posturing about the respect he has for Elmo's dad, Elmo is really only brought closer by being the last man standing after Nidge's relationship with Fran falls to pieces.
Fuck you!
How many movies have you seen where somebody says you should have killed me when you had the chance? Well, Nidge really should have. At the season's beginning, he is Fran cornered. He knows Fran hung him out to dry, knowing Andrew was talking to the police, and he lets him live, saying he needs him. And in a sense, he does. John Boy's threat to Darren was,
I could pay 100 17-year-old crackerjacks to come and to hunt you day and night. 10 grand each, 100 grand for the winner. You wouldn't last 24 hours. See, that's the kind of money I have.
Nidge does not have that kind of money and genuinely needs the help. Where John Boy and Terrence give their orders from their apartments, Nidge is always in the thick of it. Paulie said he likes to do hits himself to keep his wits about him. Nidge, I think, would like to be sitting back, giving the orders and collecting the money, but it's just not feasible for him. Even after becoming boss, Nidge doesn't leave his home in Castle Knock. And while this is a better house than you or I could hope for, it's not a penthouse or a Spanish villa or that ski lodge thing the Kinsellas live in. I think Nidge would like to move somewhere like that, not alone because of how susceptible this house is to home invasions, and when he does move houses this season, after things escalate with Patrick, It really is a lateral move house-wise. In any event, he does let Fran live, but later in the season he does the same for Dean. I think he really is hard up for a bit of company. Like this season, Moynihan has an undercover guy, Scotty, hanging out around the paddock. He gets in close enough to be offered a job as a driver, but wrecks it all by sleeping with Nadine and getting caught by Nidge. And Nidge, despite supposedly being Ado's friend, and despite Ado just having had his brother's eye cut out, is delighted to find out Ado is being cheated on. But it's not entirely because this opens up the possibility of his getting with Nadine, or just because he's a prick.
Stop asking upset, yeah?
This is something he has in his back pocket to hold over Scotty if he ever needed something done. But also in relation to Fran, I think Nidge enjoys how the power dynamic in their relationship shifts back to almost where it was in the 3rd season, where Fran was licking his boots, where Fran would do anything to please him. This is short-lived, however, as this would include Fran doing things he explicitly told him not to do, like go and talk to Patrick.
Take it back with you, and use it to buy yourself a headstone.
I think this scene is the cherry on the cake of the first episode, after they've each made attempts on each other. Nidge and Patrick are persuaded into a sit-down, and just at the moment it seems Patrick is going to go for it.
He has the nits, does he?
There's what?
The nits. You know, the headlights. Best way to get rid of them, shave the head. Into the bar by getting number 1.
Oh, you asked me does my young fella have headlights?
What?
Nidge's fate is sealed with a faux pas, but I think part of why this is so potent to Patrick is even the most respectable person from his background has had to take that kind of remark from someone like that. Patrick's background is explored more this season. There's a lot of slang I don't understand and some thick accents. And Patrick takes his son out for a meal after he's been getting hassle in school for living on a site. Once again, like with Dano or with Moynihan, Nidge is coming up against somebody who believes in something greater. I said previously that Patrick tried his best to stay out of trouble not for fear of his life but for fear of what it takes to win. This includes turning his home into a fortress of sorts, but also using himself as bait to take out his assassin. He lets Paulie follow him to the pub and gets him to chase him out the back, banking on him being shot in the back. He perhaps approaches this with such zeal because in between seasons he's had an infant die on him, which just makes the events of the 4th episode hit harder.
Cold.
This is an interesting season to watch in 2 halves. The first 3 episodes is love-hate as you have known it till now, but once Potsy attempts a hit on Fran, things take a turn for the dark. This 4th episode is one of the most depressing episodes of television I've ever seen. In the aftermath of the failed hit on Fran, we contrast Paulie in a dingy hospital bed with only a prison guard as company, with Tommy who still has someone coming in to see him. Ado, distraught at the news his brother had his eye cut out, goes back to his flat, and Nidge visits him. Not to comfort him, but because Ado mentioned he may have a way of getting to Patrick. And this is where we meet Packy. Packy is somebody who racked up huge debts with Ado while addicted to drugs. He's gotten clean, and we meet him as being part of a group where former drug addicts dance to metal music and scream Bible verses at each other, which is just so crazy it must be true. And to add credibility, this group features Irish rapper Tommy KD, who has spoken on rap for years about his struggles with drug addiction. And a version of this group here is something he was a part of at one stage of his recovery. Packy is plucked from this group by Ado to perform the hit on Patrick. The reason being they're both travellers. He doesn't want to do the hit, but he owes Ado money. We see a different side to Ado here. While he's always been the comic relief till now, this brings home that if you came across this guy in real life, you'd cross the street. But what we've seen preceding this is Ado making it known to everyone except Nidge that he didn't want Potsy doing the hit. And he probably wants nothing to do with this either, but he's incapable of standing up for himself in relation to this, due presumably to his history of addiction. Earlier in Series 2, John Boy shunned Ado for his habit after the hotel bust, and he just sat there in silence taking the abuse. But when you have someone like that, and then you have the rung beneath them, it's even more tragic. Packy clearly isn't cut out to perform this hit, so you're watching it just dreading it, knowing something will go wrong. And it does. Not alone does he hit Patrick's son Brandon, but he's captured and is left behind. There is no notion of anyone coming to save him. This is not the love-hate of yesteryear where Darren's facing off against a group of gunmen to save Nidge. Packy's fate is as gruesome as the others this season. We're shielded only from seeing just how gruesome due to a light bulb being out. Before killing him, there's a long conversation between Patrick and Packy about whether or not he'll do it. In his retrospective of the series for The Independent, Pat Stacey wrote of this scene, tedious philosophical musings about the consequences of taking a life suggested too many viewings of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. I would push back on that just a bit. From the 1 or 2 interviews with John Connors I've listened to, he has spoken about what it meant to him to be seen as a man or less of a man in his community, and he spoke about it in relation to losing his father at a young age. And in this scene, Patrick speaks to Packy about how were he to let him live, he would be deemed weak and unable to protect his family. So one could assume John Connors bore influence on Stuart Carolan in relation to this. So while someone else looked at this scene and saw stuff they'd seen before, I think this conversation taking place between 2 Irish travellers is a fresh spin on it. But like all the standout moments from this season, it's really well done. And you just want it to be over so you can take a shower or watch something frothier. And our reward for having suffered through all of that is to see Siobhan kill off Paulie, as if she hadn't enough on her plate already, meaning she now can't be honest with Moynihan. Moynihan and the Gardaí I actually find less interesting this season. They just aren't given as much to do, less time is spent with them, but where last season they were constantly getting new intel, putting a case together, this is less so what happens here. Whereas last season it built towards Siobhan informing on Nidge, all that they get from Siobhan this season is that Paulie is meeting with someone at the zoo. They arrest Fran, twice, and Elmo, but neither of that is to do with the information Siobhan gives them. In Elmo's case, he's followed, he goes to buy a SIM card, and they go in afterwards to get the number and intercept his calls and texts. However, I do think it's interesting that the fallout from Elmo's arrest is Janet's murder. However, while Nidge, Beano and Terence get all worked up over a rat, Elmo's arrest had nothing to do with the info Siobhan was giving Moynihan. So that's stuff I like. But there's some non-starters this season. This season tries to show a little bureaucracy in the guards. There's a superintendent that the guys hate, who's mandating stops and searches, and who seems to be more interested in keeping up appearances than good police work. He's declining extra resources to go towards the case after the bust up at Andrew's warehouse, and is nonplussed about Terence financially backing Nidge. I'd be interested to see these explored more, but they aren't. Same as well with the scenes of Moynihan at home. There's one or two scenes of him at home with his wife, and I think the idea is he's married to his job and they're distant from one another. But again, these scenes are really neither here nor there. When I first watched this season, not knowing it was about to end, I didn't mind these scenes because I thought it was going somewhere. But on the rewatch, these are just killing runtime, and it's a pity because I like this character and I wish he had more to do, but he really doesn't get it until the last episode. So this last episode of Love Hate is an interesting one for me to talk about, because while I was watching this week to week, I didn't have a TV. So I tried watching it on RT Player live, but in something which has been satirized since, within seconds of the show beginning, the website crashed. There was just too many people trying to watch this thing, so I'd always watch the episodes on the Monday morning. However, at this time I was addicted to Facebook, so I couldn't stay away for one evening, and sure enough, the night of episode 6, everybody was writing about Nidge's death. So I was watching this last episode knowing what was coming at the end. And in a sense it did spoil it for me, because this last episode is trying to misdirect you. It is building towards the police closing in on Nidge. After the end of the 4th episode, Patrick disappears. He's not seen or heard from till the last 2 minutes of the episode. Where previously the show showed how he tracked and followed Nidge, this one does not show you he knows where Nidge lives or when his security are away. So despite having been robbed of that surprise, I still really like this episode. The idea being that Janet's torture and death is where it all gets too much. Nidge is unable to live with himself. Moynihan breaks down and just punches Nidge. This last episode gives us Trish's best scene. After Nidge tells you what happened to Janet.
Maybe it's a woman thing.
What?
You're able to wait till you fucked me first.
Jesus Christ, Trish, it's not like that. I wanted to tell you, didn't I tell you now?
But there are standout moments of agony. There's the one from the memes with Fran on the pool cue. It's horrendous. This is one of those bits you watch from behind the couch. But almost more agonizing is Siobhan. After enduring so much, she indulges and permits herself to give Nidge a piece of her mind, and to let him know she's getting back at him by talking to the police. This puts her at Nidge's side and she catches a stray bullet from Patrick's gun. When you think about it, Siobhan's death is potentially the most tragic out of all the characters. However, you wouldn't think about it because the show devotes a mere second to dwell on it, because the scene is all about the death of the main man, and the scene is expertly acted by Tom Von Lawler.
You little fucking bitch.
Care to believe me?
I've not really spoken about Lawler till now because I wanted to save it to the end, but also what is there to say that hasn't already been said? The reason those side-by-side videos of his accent are so funny is precisely because it is so convincing. But the best is saved for last. This final scene between him and Siobhan has to be his best performance in the show. The way his pupils dilate, the way his throat gets cut, and he calls her an ungrateful wagon.
You're an ungrateful wagon, you know that? A fucking tramp!
In an interview, Lawler said he thought Nidge was incredibly shrewd and smart, which at first glance seems hilarious because apart from naming his baby John to throw the police off the scent, almost every decision Nidge makes after becoming the boss is the wrong decision. But I think to get into character, he really had to understand his intentions and motivation, and hats off to him for inhabiting that character so well, right up until the moment he shot down, looking at his son, bringing the show we all love so much to an end. So what I've enjoyed about this rewatch is seeing what you make of it once it's done. As opposed to other shows where before the first episode is written and endpoint is in mind, this was a show which was made up as it went along, but it took it a step further by ending almost each season on the off chance they could end there. So when you watch the first episode to the last, is it a collection of good separate stories, or does it tell a good story from beginning to end? And I think it does. I think the story starts with a boss who so clearly makes all the wrong calls, the person closest to him takes him out, takes his place, and slowly but surely makes the same mistakes. And that is why I think Nidge's death is the perfect place to end the show. In my opinion, I think the reports about a Series 6 was just done to keep the ending a surprise, and I don't think it was seriously considered. While Moynihan and Patrick are good characters that are still going, and there's no connection between them, and any subsequent stories would be so different there'd be no point in calling it love-hate, and they'd be better off as spin-offs, like with War and Peace. In 2015, RTE said love-hate was no longer an active development, and in 2017, John Connors confirmed love-hate would not be returning. Nidgerbhliain, who had written for The Wire, was attached in 2015 to make an American remake of Love-Hate, and to state the blindingly obvious, this is a terrible idea. Every good review Love-Hate has ever gotten always says Irish Sopranos, Irish Wire, and this show wears its influences on its sleeve. So when you take our equivalent of the American telly and then remake it in America, it's sort of like the snake eating its own tail. Anyway, I never really believed this show would get made. It didn't, and then that was where the notion of any more love-hate content died. Until...
Is love-hate coming back? The floor is yours.
Yeah.
It is? It is?
Yeah, it is coming back, yeah.
In February 2025, John Connors went to the 6 o'clock show and announced apropos of nothing that Love-Hate was coming back and was due to be announced soon. He then took it a step further in a series of TikToks announcing that much like the Top Boy revival, it was coming back on Netflix, back-to-back seasons were being shot, so not only a 6th season but a 7th, and he took it even a step further by saying Nidge was alive. This spawned many articles, some running with the news it was coming back, others questioning it. Things got even more confused when an article in The Independent appeared saying Stuart Carolan was working on a new crime drama which would be the spiritual successor to Love-Hate, but not an out-and-out new season. It was very confusing. Within days, representatives of RTE and Netflix confirmed the show was not returning. It readily became apparent Connors was making it up, and if one looked at the TikToks he made announcing the show's return, they always went hand in hand with him announcing something else he was working on, like his live events, his production company, or his podcast. Connors was criticised by many, but not by me, because it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge how these videos benefited from Love-Hate being back in the news. But would I want to see this show return? Definitely not. All that I'd be interested in is love-hate babies. Warren saw his own father gunned down, Brandon took a stray bullet, and Leighton is a whole other kettle of fish. Given that it's been 10 years and they would all be late teens, I'd be interested to see what became of them. But all that'd be good for is a short film, and not a series. That being said, however, I don't wish for us to be done. I think what Love-Hate really needs is a making-of documentary. I speculated in these videos an awful lot more than I would have wished to. Researching these videos, the information about how the show was made was so disparate, and a lot of the actors either have too small a profile to be interviewed, or so large is their profile that when they are being interviewed, it's for something else they've done. But the acting is only one part of it, and the people I'd really want to hear from are Carolan, the director David Caffrey, and the brass at RTE who greenlit the show. I'd also love to hear commentary tracks on the episodes, and a Blu-ray box set would be the perfect place to put all of that. The only physical copies one can get of the show are on DVD, so unless I'm mistaken, the only HD versions are the one from RTE Player with the watermark in the top right. So here's hoping for something like that eventually. I suppose to wrap things up I ought to talk about the show's legacy, but I sort of did that at the start of the first video. And yeah, there's been imitators since, and when Kin came out, Love-Hate was in the first paragraph of everything written about it. Perhaps the show's legacy need be no greater than, it's a really well made show that you can revisit again and again. Although speaking personally, throughout the process of making these videos and grabbing all this footage, I've had my fill and probably won't be going back for another 10 years or so. Unless of course I get myself a partner and I show it to her. So yeah, not for another 10 years. I am on Gap Year Forever, and this has been my Love-Hate Rewatch.